Chapter 374. It's about time. Will you be able to accept such a great gift? Ha! Just as Sang Poo and Olivier arrived at Call City, Tang In had almost reached the neighboring city as well. Thinking of the other party's current situation, he could not help but raise his head and put his hands on his hips, laughing loudly. That's right, the sensational report in Call City's newspapers today was Tang In's masterpiece. That night, Tang In had snuck into the propaganda department and bumped into something good, but he did not expect the person involved to be the director of the propaganda department. After knowing this identity, the rest of the matter was easy to handle. After stating his request and showing his strength, both parties immediately reached a friendly cooperation. It was so easy, not only because his life was in danger, but because Tang In's request was more like exposing a crime, so the director agreed without hesitation and even put on the front page of the newspaper. The contents of the newspaper were prepared by Tang In advance, 80% true and 20% false. The real part was the process of the fight and the details of the destruction of the statue, while the false part was to drag Sang Poo and Oliver into it and make them guilty of being accomplices. Moreover, with such a ratio, it looked like the evidence was conclusive and there was no contradiction. Schemes, to put it bluntly, were mostly about thinking of ways to scheme against others. Tang In had some experience in this, so he did not feel any pressure using it. Therefore, after knowing that the Grey Coat Army's base had been discovered and their escape route had been cut off, Tang In immediately came up with this idea. Generally speaking, this idea had more advantages than disadvantages, so it could be used. The so-called disadvantage was that this would undoubtedly enrage the other party. In fact, after knowing that Oliver had gone to Mountain Stream City to investigate the situation, Tang In knew that the other party had not completely lost his mind due to hatred. Therefore, the other party's next move should be to test him first. But now, this process had undoubtedly been cancelled. As for the advantages, it was simple. The destruction of the statue of the goddess was already fermenting, and this report with pictures and the truth in Call City would definitely spread throughout the North in a very short period of time. As promised by the church, the team sent by the Holy City to investigate the culprit had already arrived in Mountain Stream City. Once they received the news, well, with Josiah's secret organization, they would receive the news as soon as possible. What happened next was needless to say. As long as Tang In could survive these 2 or 3 days, the situation would be really lively. The Sang Poo duo chased after Tang In, and the Temple of Light team chased after the Sang Poo duo. Although no matter what, Tang In still could not escape the misfortune of being hunted down, at least he had successfully muddied the waters, and vaguely saw a glimmer of hope in this hopeless situation. TSK Tisk, that's why people say that if you're not ruthless, you won't be able to stand firm. Tang In sighed. He quickly passed through the city and arrived at the East City Gate. His next stop was the Central City, Fire Beacon City. To be honest, his current choice could be said to be both meticulous and casual. With a 1/3 chance of winning, there weren't many tricks that could be played. However, if he was too casual and kept going around in circles according to a fixed trajectory, it would naturally not work. If it was purely based on luck, Tang In really did not have much confidence in his character. Therefore, every time he chose a direction, Tang In would try his best to calculate the opponent's position and the possible choices they might make. It was a bit like rock, paper, scissors. Although luck played a large part, as long as he calculated carefully, he could always increase his chances of success. Well, even if it was just a psychological effect. It was just past noon, and the slight heating effect of the spatial, I arrived on time. Tang In also rode out without hesitation. On the other side, the Sang Poo duo chose to stay where they were. They stood on the side of the official road outside Guer City, silently watching the pedestrians on the road. This choice was made by Sang Poo. It seemed to be wishful thinking, but it was just like how there was always a fine line between a genius and an idiot. They had been framed in Guer City. Logically speaking, they should have subconsciously left this place. After all, it was human nature to seek benefits and avoid harm. Moreover, This news had not yet spread to other cities, so it would be easier to move to another place. However, it was also because of this that Sang-Pu had decided to stay here. The opponent was not stupid, so he should have thought of this. If that was the case, would he turn around and make a counterattack? Sigh. To be honest, I'm starting to wonder if the opponent is in the same profession as us. This move is really vicious. Oliver turned over and fell on the slope, shaking his head and sighing helplessly. Sang-Pu was silent. He pursed his lips and slowly exhaled. They were really wronged, but after the report was released, there was no way for them to refute it. This was the Temple of Light. No one was willing to provoke such a colossus. However, they had no other choice now. They could only brace themselves and face it head-on. Moreover, the impact of this matter was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. It could even be said that the opponent had single-handedly destroyed the famous Dusk Hunter group. This was not an exaggeration. Now, even if they could kill that damn guy before the people of the Temple of Light arrived, they would not be able to escape. Even so, it couldn't change their fate of escaping. Yep, there was still that unsuspecting regiment commander in the forest who was unjustly attacked. Where could they escape to? The northern wilderness. In the evening, the two naturally did not wait for the opponent to arrive. However, they were not discouraged. After all, sensing was the key. They patted the dust off their bodies and teleported into Gewer City under the cover of the night. Their impression of the opponent was that of a wanted poster, a middle-aged man with a cold expression. It was naturally difficult to find him. Moreover, if a carriage passed by the hill, they would not be able to stop it for inspection. This was because it would easily expose their position and alert the enemy. Therefore, it was normal for the opponent to go around them and enter Gewer City. In a small alley in the city, the white light on his fingertips dissipated. His hands separated from the hand seals. Sang-Pu's expression was somewhat ugly. He shook his head and said, "He's in Fire Beacon City. F***CK. Oliver scratched his head and cursed in a low voice. The opponent was in Fire Beacon City. This meant that other than staying where they were, there were 4 other directions they could choose to leave. This undoubtedly increased the difficulty of their next decision. What was even more depressing was that they had originally planned to stay in Fire Beacon City and wait for the opportunity to come if they did not find anything in Gewer City. But now that the opponent had left, it was unlikely that he would come again. If it was before, they would still have the capital to continue waiting in Fire Beacon City. However, no one knew when the people from the Temple of Light would come. If they bumped into them, it would be hard to say who would be the one to be hunted down. What do we do now? Which direction should we go? Oliver asked with a shrug. Although Sang-Pu's judgment was wrong, he naturally would not blame him. After all, it was a very persuasive judgment. If it were him, he could only guess. This way. Sang-Pu did not think for long and simply walked to the left. Oliver followed. What's the reason this time? No particular reason. Have you noticed that as long as you're not left-handed, most people are used to going to the right? Oh no. Oliver was stunned and shook his head. He then smacked his lips. TSK. You can even notice that? Just how? Bored. Sang-Pu shrugged and said indifferently. It was a magic teacher of mine who discovered it. He lived for nearly 300 years. For such a long time, he always had to find something boring to pass the time. That's true. Oliver could not help but open his mouth and laugh. But then his heart suddenly moved. He hesitated and asked, "But how do we know which side is his right?" This question was very realistic. If they were facing each other, then their left side was indeed the opponent's right side. But what if it was their back? It was sideways. Sang-Pu stopped and reached out to pinch his chin. After a while, he nodded. It's indeed a problem. Well, what do you think? No, then it's settled. Let's keep going. The next chase was really regardless of day or night. 1 round every 6 hours. If it did not meet, they would continue to judge. Every choice was a gamble, and the chips were their lives. Luck, character, wisdom, cleverness. In the end, success or failure depended on the result. Looking at the overall situation, Sang-Pu and his companion had a greater advantage. After all, they held the initiative and could know Tang Un's position from time to time, which gave them a psychological advantage. In Tang Un's every judgment was an unknown journey. From the middle of the journey to crossing the entire city, he was always on guard against potential dangers. It was like walking in the night. It was dark all around. You never knew if there were wild beasts in the darkness, and you never knew if there was a deep pit waiting in front of you. You could only keep making choices and keep walking. Of course, Tang In was not without any advantages. Compared to Sang Pu and Oliver, he was hiding in the dark. Although they had never met, at least he had some understanding of them. His understanding was poor, but it was still useful for his judgment. In addition, Tang In's biggest reliance now was Josiah's secret organization. From the moment he came to GOL City, all the secret organizations in these 5 cities have been activated. Although these scattered personnel might not be able to find Sang Pu and Oliver, they could still spread some newspapers in GOL City to the churches, police stations, and propaganda offices of their respective cities. In addition, Josiah, who was in charge of Mountain Stream City, had also sent an important message in a timely manner. A group of people from the Temple of Light was coming here. The estimated time of arrival was in the afternoon 2 days later. But when Tang In received the news in GOL City, it was already early in the morning. He did not know if it was because of his good luck or because he was better than Sang Pu in terms of calculation, but he made a total of 6 judgments and did not make a single mistake. Tears streamed down his face. Such an outcome made Tang In feel that his luck had finally taken a turn for the better, and that extreme misfortune had turned into bliss. After destroying the letter, Tang In thought about it for a while, and finally chose Fire Beacon City with full confidence. Then this time, would he be able to get through this last critical moment with good luck? Cough, cough. Open the bet, open the bet. The lucky Tang In versus the scheming Sang Pu. Was there anyone willing to bet on it? Well, there should be no one. Chapter 375. Phew. Where's it this time? Gewer City. F*CKU. After a weak greeting, Oliver, who had been leaning against the alley, sat on the ground and scratched his head to get rid of the dew on it. He looked very depressed. Sang Pu's face was still covered by his black robe, so his expression could not be seen. However, from the way he pulled down his hood, he seemed to be feeling a little embarrassed. That's right, Sang Pu was indeed embarrassed. 6 times, an entire day and 2 nights, and he had not made a single correct decision. Although the probability of making a choice was basically the same every time, missing so many times in a row was enough to make him feel ashamed. Do you think someone is spying on us and spreading the news? Oliver looked around and asked suspiciously. Impossible. Sang Pu shook his head and quickly denied it. We used spatial teleportation to enter and exit the city. We only stayed for a few minutes, so it's impossible to be watched. Then what the F*CK is going on? Oliver hugged his head and growled with a troubled expression. Is that person's luck really that good? Is his strategy really that good? Or are we just too unlucky? Sang Pu was silent. It was hard to say whether the other party was a god or not, but he was definitely unlucky enough. After a while, he suddenly looked up. Oliver, you be the judge this time. Me? Oliver looked up in surprise and pointed at himself. Then, as if he understood something, he touched his hair. Ahem, Sang Pu, don't misunderstand. I don't mean to blame you. It's not that. Sang Pu waved his hand and said, from the picture in the newspaper, the other party should know about us. He must have guessed that I would be the one to make the decision. If he was familiar with my personality, this result could be explained. So this time, you try to be the judge. Is that so? Oliver hesitated and finally nodded. He then thoughtfully scratched his chin and hammered his palm. Then let's go to Fire Beacon City. Oh, is there a reason? The other party had been to Fire Beacon City before, so the probability was not high. However, Sang Pu did not object and only asked a question. No, I guessed it. Oliver's answer was very straightforward. Huh. Sang Pu was stunned for a moment before he snapped his fingers and a white light enveloped him. Not bad. This is the effect I wanted. When a situation had reached a stalemate and needed to be broken, strength, wisdom, tricks, and so on, as long as they were strong enough, they were all effective ways to break the stalemate. Of course, Luck was also a factor. It could even be said that this was the most heaven-defying method. There was no need to do anything. All they had to do was sit there and wait for the problem to be solved. As for the party that was broken, well, they had to accept it. This was King Fate. Noon, Firebeacon City. Tang In, who felt quite good about himself, entered the city and followed the main road to the center of the city. This time, he was not in a hurry to escape from any of the city gates. Instead, he was going to look for the secret organization to see how long it would take for the Temple of Light personnel to arrive. Of course, Tang didn't plan to let go of this kind of help. Moreover, Sang Pu and the others wouldn't be scared away. Therefore, what he needed to do now was to find a way to make these two groups meet and fight. Then, he would happily wait for the results. The flow of people and vehicles in the city was very dense. Tang looked at the snail-like traffic and simply jumped off his horse. He held the reins and prepared to cross the square. He didn't know if it was because of the lesson learned from Mountain Stream City, but after the news of Sang Pu and Olivier's arrival spread, the city was clearly on high alert. Needless to say, there was no need to mention the center of the city. Beside the majestic statue of the general, there were large groups of fully armed guards. It was also at this time that Sang Pu and Olivier appeared out of thin air at the side of the square. As soon as he stepped out, Sang Pu didn't care about the surprised crowd around him. His palms flew, and he quickly formed a seal. Firebeacon City was a large city. The square in the city was worth an inch of gold. Naturally, there weren't many alleys around it. The only thing that was slightly off was a fork in the road. Showing up here would inevitably attract attention. Their identities had only been exposed yesterday. If they stayed for too long, it would definitely cause a commotion. Although Sang Pu and Olivier didn't care about these ordinary people, the trouble that would follow was something they didn't want to provoke. Soon, the white light that had gathered between Sang Pu's fingers began to disperse. On the side, Olivier first glared at the surrounding people who had obviously recognized them and were about to cry out in shock. Then, he lazily turned his head and asked, "Where are you this time?" His tone was casual. Olivier really didn't expect them to be in Firebeacon City. After all, Sang Pu had schemed so many times without success. How could it be guessed correctly? Suddenly, with a soft sound, the white light flowing around Olivier's fingernails suddenly exploded. Sang Pu's body swayed. His clasped hands were flung away, and he couldn't help but take a step back. This was forcefully skipping the spell's ending stage. Olivier opened his mouth in shock. He hurriedly went forward to help him. "What's going on?" Sang Pu didn't answer his question. He suddenly raised his head. Under the black hood, there seemed to be a blade hidden. First, he sharply swept the surrounding crowd, and then his gaze landed on the square, not far away. Outside, there was an endless stream of carriages. Inside, there was a bustling crowd. Shoulder to shoulder, densely packed. They were like ants moving collectively before the rain, or worker bees diligently searching for food. If one wanted to find a person here, even if it was an acquaintance, the difficulty was quite high. If it was a stranger, it was tantamount to looking for a needle in a haystack. Where did he come from? A middle-aged man. A middle-aged man. Pushing away Olivier's arm, Sang Pu's body suddenly leapt 3 feet off the ground and floated in the air. His eyes were like torches, like a soaring falcon looking down from above. His head swayed slightly, filtering all kinds of faces. However, the range of a few kilometers was still too big. If he continued to search like this, wait, there's a horse. Sang Pu's eyes suddenly fixed on a man in the square whose back was facing him. He was holding the reins of a black horse and trying to move forward in the crowd. It took half a day to go back and forth between the various cities. Even if the other party's speed was extraordinary, he would definitely not leave the horse. Perhaps because Sang Pu's gaze was too sharp, the person subconsciously turned back to look. Oh, it was an ordinary young man's face. The two people's eyes met. Because of the distance, they couldn't see clearly. The young man seemed to raise his eyebrows. Then he nodded politely and revealed a bright smile. Not a middle-aged man. Sang Pu quickly eliminated the possibility. His eyes flashed and swept elsewhere. Damn it, where is he? Sang Poo. Is that person here? Did you find him? Olivier was careless, but that didn't mean he was stupid. Seeing Sang Poo's intense reaction, he instantly understood that the person they were searching for was right in front of them. Shaking his head slightly, Sang Poo continued to search while answering, "He's here, but he hasn't." That's not right. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. His entire cerebral cortex was numb. He was now floating, so why didn't the young man just now show any signs of surprise? His gaze instantly turned back. The black horse was still there, shaking its huge head uneasily. Its owner had disappeared. T. Pa. Sang Poo cursed loudly and slapped his head heavily. His body rose into the air again and flew quickly to the square. Olivier, prepare to clear the square. The other party is here. It's a young man. Chapter 376. So he was waiting for me here. I really overestimated my character when he first felt his shoulder heat up, tang, and didn't care. That was normal. He was already used to being on time these days. Besides, this was just being sensed. It didn't mean that the other party was also in the city. But out of caution, he still turned his head and observed his surroundings. When he turned his head, Tang indirectly met Sang Poo's eyes. It couldn't be helped. The black robe from head to toe was already eye-catching. Plus, he was floating in the air. It was hard not to notice. He nodded and grinned self-deprecatingly. Damn, I knew it wouldn't be so easy. He let go of the horse's reins and instantly escaped into the crowd. There was already a small commotion at the fork in the road. Sang Poo and Oliver had their own pride and didn't disguise themselves to deceive people. One was wearing animal skin, the other was wearing a black robe. They were exactly the same as the wanted portraits in the newspapers and looked very eye-catching. At this time, Sang Poo had already leapt up and flew quickly to the center of the square. This was the advantage of a magician, ignoring obstacles and gaps, instantly arriving at the destination from the fastest way. Sang Poo believed that no matter how fast the other party was, it was impossible to rush out of the crowd and leave the square in such a short time. Without a doubt, such a flashy way naturally attracted the attention of the people present. The square was suddenly silent, everyone looking up at the sky in a daze. Clear the place. Oliver looked around, licked his lips, and grabbed the huge sword. That's easy. Roar. With a violent roar, the blue light around his body shot out sharply, and after reaching a certain range, it shrank back, rolling and roaring. It was as if there were many giant beasts eager to rush out, but because they were chained up, they could only roar anxiously. This strange fighting aura light didn't last long, and then bang, 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 there were continuous loud noises. The ground shook, and it was breathtaking. Suddenly, a blue giant strode out of the fighting aura light, stopped, and looked around. This was naturally Oliver, but now his height and shape were almost twice as large as before. One had to know that he was a burly man. He was no less than 2 meters tall, and his muscles were bulging. Now that he had doubled in size, no matter how you looked at it, he looked like a legendary giant, not a purebred human. If the flying Sang Poo could still evoke feelings of worship and respect in people, then the flying Sang Poo would be able to evoke feelings of admiration and respect. When it came to the giant Oliver, there was only fear. Scram! Oliver raised his saber and roared. It was like a sudden clap of thunder spreading out for miles. Oh my God! Help! Like a boiling pot, the surrounding crowd let out sharp screams, unconsciously venting the fear in their hearts, and fled in all directions. As such, the atmosphere of panic began to spread. After achieving his goal, Oliver no longer hesitated and walked towards the square. Damn it, what exactly does he look like? On the other side, Sang Poo, who had already arrived in the sky above the center of the square, did his best to scan the crowd below while muttering in his heart. Earlier, when he saw that the young man didn't look like a middle-aged man, he didn't pay much attention to him. Now that he realized that something was wrong, he couldn't remember what the other party looked like. Gray clothes, ordinary faces. Damn it, there were too many of them. Such a result was not surprising at all. When Tang and made camouflage, he would only do so for special needs, such as to become the focus of a party. Otherwise, all the other faces looked ordinary and familiar. At this time, the stunned people in the square finally came to their senses. The people under Sang Poo's feet subconsciously moved away, while the people on the edge of the square slowly retreated. "Stay where you are, don't move," Sang Poo roared at the top of his lungs. The so-called clearing of the square was to clear the surrounding roadways of irrelevant people to create an open space. This way, even if the other party forced their way through, they would be discovered immediately. But if the people in the square were to disperse now, how would they find him? However, the situation now was obviously not normal, and some people had already recognized Sang Poo's identity. Thinking of the example of Mountain Stream City, shouting was naturally useless. The dense crowd paused for a moment before dispersing at an even faster speed. At this time, boom, 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 one after another, there were continuous explosions, mixed with a few horrified screams. The roadways on the west side of the square suddenly collapsed side by side, creating a spectacular scene unique to a disaster scene. Some carriages were also affected, and those that were further away were sent flying. Those that were closer fell directly into a huge pit. Gravel flew, people and horses were thrown off their feet. Sang Poo put down the wand in his hand, looked down at the momentarily silent square, and said coldly, "Whoever dares to leave will end up like this." Before he finished speaking, whoosh, 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 a black mass of arrows shot out from below, the rotating arrowheads whistling with the sound of the Grim Reaper. Don't forget that in addition to the ordinary people in the square, there were also large groups of garrison cavalry below the statue. Thinking of Sang Poo's past, thinking of the fate of the mountain stream goddess statue, they decisively chose to attack. It was better to kill the wrong person than to let them go. After all, behind them was the city's iconic statue. Damn it! Sang Poo cursed, but he did not dare to be negligent. With a wave of his wand, a white light was released around him. In order to control the situation, he could only stand in the air without any cover, and this made him a live target for the archers. At such a close distance, the possibility of missing was almost zero, and with such a dense attack, even if he put up a magic shield, it would be difficult. However, whoosh, 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 the whistling arrows instantly passed through the white light, as if they were not blocked at all, and continued to fly in the air according to their original trajectory. Whoosh, in the air more than 10 meters away, Sang Poo's figure appeared with an ashen face. Short-distance teleportation required time to prepare, but in this kind of small area teleportation, it was really teleportation. You're courting death. In a bounty hunter business, there was no one who would lose out. Sang Poo did not hesitate, and spat out a few simple words. The magic wand in his hand was like a large sword, slashing towards the garrison cavalry from afar. It was silent, without any signs of an attack. But the garrison cavalry at the front suddenly trembled, lowering their heads, and the armor at their waist broke from the middle. The cut was extremely smooth, as if it had been cut by the sharpest sword. Then blood spurted out, and their vision swayed involuntarily as they watched their upper bodies fall. Blood instantly soaked around the statue, and screams spread throughout the square. Half of the cavalry tried to raise their hands in the pool of blood to call for help, while their companions who were lucky enough not to die at the back hurriedly retreated. This was the strange way of attack of a spatial magician, invisible and formless. Not only was it difficult to guard against, it was also very lethal. Roar! With a violent roar, the square was in an uproar again, and the crowd in the north cried out in alarm, constantly retreating. There, a ferocious-looking blue giant with a huge sword was approaching step by step, full of deterrence. Damn it! Tang En, who was hidden in the crowd, grimaced as if he had a toothache, and cursed in a low voice. His injuries had almost recovered in the past few days, and although he was not at his peak state, he still had 80% of his strength. But even so, facing the two people in front of him, he had no chance of winning. And the current situation was extremely unfavorable to him. Everyone in the square, including the garrison cavalry, was intimidated. If he went in such a situation, the other party would definitely eliminate them one by one, and then he would be exposed. Disguise again? It was too late, and with so many people around, it was undoubtedly impossible to complete this job secretly. I should have learned Thousand Faces. Tang inside, and felt a little regretful. There was a Thousand Faces skill in the concealment skill tree, which could instantly change the shape of one's face. Tangen had actually met the requirements to learn it long ago, but because this skill was too dangerous and he had the craftsmanship to make disguises, he had not learned this seemingly useless skill. Who would have thought that he would be in such an awkward situation now, and he could not disguise even if he wanted to? Forget it. Tang quickly cleared his mind of negative emotions. Avoiding Sang Pu's sight, he looked around. When he saw the general statue following the scream, his heart suddenly moved. Then he touched his nose and quietly moved in that direction. That's right. Tangen's idea was on the general statue. Waiting for death was never his style. If he could escape, the consequences of his methods were secondary. But Tangen looked at the statue and could not help but feel a little emotional. Damn it, I have a huge grudge with these statues since I came to this world. Not counting the one in front of me, there are at least 2 or 3 that have been destroyed by my hands. Don't hide, it's useless. If you still have a trace of a warrior's dignity, come out and fight. Sang Pu held his magic staff and floated in the air. His gaze swept across the surroundings, and the corner of his mouth twitched. What? You have the ability to kill, but don't have the guts to admit it. Silence. All right. Sang Pu motioned to Oliver in the distance. The latter nodded, inserted his huge sword into the ground, and pushed the crowd aside to check. Let's chat. Did Eunice mention me to you before she died? I don't think so. Sang Pu shook his head with a smile and said lightly, she was more interested in beautiful clothes than men. I don't understand. Don't women wear beautiful clothes for men to see? Unfortunately, she didn't need praise, especially from me. Maybe it's because I always like to wear a black robe, so there's a difference in aesthetic. You might have some doubts. That's right, I like her. With a faint sigh, Oliver, who was checking below, suddenly paused and looked up with a face full of surprise. No one knows. She doesn't know. The leader and the others don't know. Maybe it's because she's timid. Most of the time, she's hesitant. I also tested her jokingly, and she responded with a smile. I can't imagine how her mage husband would still be alive and kicking when she's about to enter her coffin with a head full of white hair. Actually, I wasn't too sad when Goshawk died because she seemed to like him more. Phew. It's a little despicable, but it's my true thoughts. There's no purpose in telling you this. Maybe it's a little. Don't you think the situation today is very similar to Mountain Stream City? Speaking of which, I have to thank you. Thank you for choosing this place, allowing me to take my revenge. Tisk, it's more meaningful. The atmosphere was a little quiet and a little strange. Sang Pu floated high in the air, as if he was giving a speech, but more like he was muttering to himself. The people below were in a daze and felt a little confused. This was vaguely a poignant love story about unrequited love, but the content was a little confusing. And in this situation, is this guy crazy? Thank your sister. Following the crowd that retreated from the north, Tang didn't pay attention to Sang Pu's words and successfully approached the statue. The first thing that caught his eye was the spreading bloodstains and the still twitching half of the knight's body. The surrounding people tried their best to retreat, not daring to look down. The surviving knights all retreated to the bottom of the statue, their faces full of horror. They looked up at Sang Pu in the sky and felt a little conflicted. Tang could understand their thoughts. Sang Pu's strength was too terrifying, and they didn't want to provoke him. However, after the statue of the goddess in Mountain Stream City was destroyed, the knights responsible for guarding it were all hanged. Although this was influenced by the Temple of Light, they still had reason to believe that if the statue of the general behind them was destroyed, they would definitely be sent to prison. Don't be conflicted. Let me choose for you. Tang Yin's face was indifferent, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a cold smile. Then, with a flip of his right hand, he secretly buckled an explosive crystal, and with a shake of his wrist, swoosh. The crystal was extremely fast, and with a flash of red light, it passed through the gaps between the knights and landed on the base of the statue. Boom! Waves of air rolled, and gravel shot out. The knights next to him were caught off guard and were immediately overturned to the ground. Whoosh! This explosion also caused a large-scale chaos in the square, and the crowd was eager to avoid Oliver in the north and to explore the surrounding areas. Sang Pu immediately turned his gaze to the statue, but he didn't see Tang Yin. Instead, he saw the knights who raised their bows again and frowned, shaking his head and muttering to himself, "Oh, you really make me angry." Chapter 377. After the explosion, the general statue did not move at all. However, at the base, a small part of it had already collapsed. One explosive crystal was not enough to destroy the entire statue. After all, this was only a small one, not a big one like the one in Mjolnir that could only be carried by one person. However, this was enough to make the cavalry tremble in fear. Without orders from their commander, everyone raised their bows and pointed upwards. Tang Yin threw the crystal so quickly that they did not see any trace of it. As such, they naturally put the blame on Sang Pu. After all, this was very similar to his silent attack just now. Release. The cavalry captain retracted his gaze from the collapsed base of the statue. His eyes were bloodshot as he gave the order to attack without hesitation. Whoosh, 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 black arrows whizzed out again, densely shooting towards the live target in the air. Whoosh, this kind of defensive shooting could not do anything to Sang Pu. He waved his staff and moved again. There, release, disperse, disperse. After the cavalry captain caught sight of Sang Pu's figure, he was about to give the order to attack again. However, after seeing Sang Pu waving his staff, his expression changed, and he shouted for the cavalry to disperse. Chi chi chi, another wave of screams. Some of the cavalry followed in the footsteps of their previous companions. However, the number of casualties was much better than before. Many people managed to dodge the invisible attack. However, the space was only so big. Those cavalry who managed to dodge the attack could not help but fall into the crowd. The chaos brought about by this was no doubt complete. The tragedy in front of them was shocking. No one wanted to be affected and become the next unlucky victim. Run! A howl came from somewhere. The surrounding people's legs seemed to have received an order as they immediately squeezed outside while crying for their parents. With the chaos inside, those outside could only follow whether they were willing or not. Otherwise, they would be trampled to death. Go back, all of you go back. Oliver, who was in the crowd, roared furiously. He grabbed the people beside him and threw them inside. However, this was undoubtedly a drop in the bucket. There were escape routes in all directions. Even if he had hands all over his body, how many could he throw? After a while, not only did this action not have any effect, but the crowd surrounded him. Sang Pu, who was in the air, also realized that the situation was not right. He frowned and waved his staff towards the side of the square. Ah! A series of blood-curdling screams rang out, sounding more like the sonata of the Grim Reaper. The first group to run out of the square was cut in half at the waist, just like the cavalry before them. Blood splattered in the air. It was a tragic sight. The flow of people there instantly stopped, and those who were close to it directly sat down on the ground. Some fainted, and some subconsciously crawled back. Unfortunately, the entire square was in chaos. The people inside didn't know what was going on outside, so they kept pushing the crowd to the outside. Even if he knew, he had no other choice. Moreover, there was more than one direction of escape. Perhaps the demon could not take care of all of them. The general trend had been formed, and it was unstoppable. F*CKU. Open for me. A blue light exploded in the square, and figures flew in all directions, clearing the area in an instant. Thud, thud, thud. Oliver's face was ashen. He took a few big strides and pulled out the huge saber that was stuck in the ground. He turned around, gathered his strength, and slashed horizontally. F***CK, break for me. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk a gigantic blue sword aura swept across the sky, tearing through the air with a scorching whistle, heading straight for the statue of the general. Oliver was really annoyed. Damn it, a stupid statue ruined my plans. If that's the case, then let's do it directly. An all-out attack from an Earth-rank warrior was not easy to block, not to mention that it was sent by Oliver. Even Tang En, who had recovered from his injuries, had to temporarily avoid the attack, let alone the garrison cavalry. So they could only stare blankly at the gigantic sword aura coming from afar, and then it hit one of the thighs of the general's statue. Asterisk boom. Asterisk stone powder filled the air, and fragments shot out. After the blue sword aura passed through the statue, it did not stop until it overturned the roof of a two-story shop next to the square. The one-leg statue behind shook a few times, and the other leg finally shattered. Then it finally kissed the ground in an unstoppable manner. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk this kiss was really heroic. The ground shook, and the sound lingered in the air. The statue also shattered into several pieces in an instant, no longer as majestic as it used to be. Because of the previous escape, except for a few unlucky cavalrymen, the statue did not hit anyone else. But it was undeniable that this huge movement directly sent the chaotic situation into a frenzied climax. Screams, hysterical roars of fear. The bustling square in the city turned into a disaster scene in the blink of an eye, and the reaction of the crowd was even more intense. At this point, no one's mind was clear. There was only one clear thought, and that was to escape. But was it really that easy? Asterisk chi. Asterisk along with the terrifying sound of things being cut. The square was surrounded by mountains of corpses and seas of blood, completely turning into a land of evil. Sang Pu stopped high above the square, occasionally dodging sporadic arrows. The wand in his hand was constantly raised, raised, and slashed. The half of his face that was exposed was like molten iron, and there was no change in it. His eyes could not be seen, but one could imagine that they were filled with coldness, indifference, and so on. The escape was unstoppable. Everyone could see this, and it was impossible for Sang Pu not to know this. But he still used the fastest speed, stubbornly throwing spatial blades around, slaughtering all living things. Because there were too many directions to escape, there were naturally some who were lucky enough to escape. Sang Pu did not chase after them. It seemed that in his eyes, there was a line around the square, and those who were in the line could not escape. Those who were in the line were dead, and those outside the line were ignored. Coldness? No, this was complete indifference. Indifference to life, indifference to humanity, and indifference to himself. Now Sang Pu was the Grim Reaper. Every direction he chose meant that there were countless souls about to rise. Olivier was dumbfounded by this situation. He frowned, and his face was a little ugly. Although the other world was a world where the strong preyed on the weak, but other than war, wantonly slaughtering ordinary people was still unacceptable. Once this matter spread out, at least in the brand, there would be no place for Sang Pu and Oliver. But now, did Sang Pu care about this? He was now being chased by the Temple of Light. When there were too many debts, he did not worry, and when there were too many lice, he did not itch. Anyway, after this matter was over, he would escape to the northern wilderness, so one more crime did not matter. Oliver did not have much of an opinion about this. He was worried about Sang Pu's current state. There was no anger, only a terrible sense of destruction. Not only could he destroy others, but he could also destroy himself, as if nothing mattered. Just as Oliver was worrying, Sang Pu's body in the air suddenly shook, and his chest rose and fell, as if he was breathing a long sigh of relief. Haha, has he finally appeared? It seems that my luck is still good. After saying this, his body flashed in the air, and he moved south as if the ground was shrinking. Chapter 378. In an open space, Tangen's speed was undeniable. If he was in his full state, few people could keep up with him. Of course, this was still incomparable to Sang-Pu, a spatial magician. His speed was definitely like a cheat. Well, perhaps it should not be called speed, because it was not on the same level at all. He could teleport several kilometers away with a single teleportation. How could his speed be matched by 2 legs? However, Sang-Pu could not do that now, because short-distance teleportation could not be as precise as a small-area teleportation. If he accidentally teleported, then Twain, who he had found with great difficulty, would disappear again. Moreover, Sang-Pu's teleportation was not slow now. Although it was not as crazy as teleportation, it was still far faster than Tangen's running speed. Even so, Tang-En still rushed into the mountains outside the city first. It cannot be helped. The early advantage was too obvious. When Sang-Pu finally realized what was going on, he was already a few miles away. That pigeon was so skillful that when Sang-Pu realized what was going on, he was already a few miles away. The terrain in the mountains was complicated. There were gullies everywhere, boulders, bushes, and forests. There were too many places to hide. It was undoubtedly difficult to find a person here. It could be said that the difficulty was no less than in a crowded city. Therefore, although it was not long, when Sang-Pu appeared in the sky outside the mountains, he still lost sight of Tang-En. Without any expression of surprise, Sang-Pu's face darkened as he descended to a height of 5 or 6 meters. He flew in a semicircle outside the mountains, searched for a while, and then returned to his original position and stopped. Losing sight did not mean that the other party had left the area. In fact, Sang-Pu was sure that the other party must be hiding somewhere not far away, and then slowly retreating through various obstacles. Sang-Pu was not in a hurry to rush in a search. Instead, he quietly floated in the air and monitored the place. Of course, this was not to say that he was afraid. He was waiting for Oliver to come. A person's line of sight would eventually have a blind spot, but if 2 people searched together and had the convenience of looking down from above, this problem could naturally be avoided to a large extent. Oliver didn't arrive very quickly. He was targeted by the city guards as soon as he stepped out of the city. In the end, he had to deactivate his giant form to escape. Of course, Firebeacon City wasn't having a good time either. Not only were a few of their priceless heavy crossbows destroyed, a few groups of soldiers who wanted to take the opportunity to rush out of the city were also blocked by Oliver's powerful blue blade aura. More than half of them were killed or injured. Sang-Pu, after all, they had known each other for a long time. Oliver immediately noticed that Sang-Pu was not in a good mood. He hesitated and asked, "That kid?" Waving his hand, Sang-Pu regained his composure and pointed to the mountain range in front of him. "It's here. Then what are we waiting for?" Oliver's eyes widened. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to rush in. Hurry up and find him. Kill him and leave. Now that things had gotten out of hand, Sang-Pu's actions in the city were enough to anger the Bran Empire, not to mention the Temple of Light. If he didn't leave as soon as possible, he would never be able to step out of Bran's territory. "Don't rush." Sang-Pu frowned. He looked at the mountain range in front of him and sighed. He shook his head. "We must search thoroughly later. Don't let go of any corner. The opponent is very cunning, and his ability to hide, well, he's not inferior to Eunice. That goes without saying. No less than Eunice?" Olivier replied casually at first, then raised his head in surprise when he realized what was going on. An excellent team member naturally had to divide the work and complement each other. It was the same for the Dusk Hunter group. Just like Oliver was responsible for attacking and covering the rear, Eunice was responsible for scouting and ambushing in the team. Therefore, her ability to hide was naturally very high. It was not an exaggeration to say that in terms of concealment, Oliver had not found anyone who was taller than Eunice among his peers. But now that he heard the hesitation in Sang-Pu's words, he was afraid that the other party was not lower than her. That was indeed the case. Even though he had been fooled, Sang-Pu had to admit that the opponent's ability to hide was indeed very good. He was even slightly better than Eunice. One must know that he had chased after the opponent in the city. Moreover, he had been in the air with a high vantage point. But there were a few times where he almost lost the opponent. He could only use large-scale magic attacks to force the opponent back. Looking at Sang Poo's serious nod, Oliver took a deep breath and nodded. Understood. Then, he walked into the mountain range with his sword. To be called a mountain range, the range was naturally not small. It was the same for the mountain range in front of him. Looking around, there were mountains of different heights and lush trees that stretched into the distance. Such an impression, coupled with the purpose of finding the person, was enough to make one despair just by imagining it. But in reality, it was not that unrealistic. The range here was very large, but no matter where one hid, it could only be a mountain peak. This way, the range of his search would be much smaller. It was not impossible for the opponent to move, but most of the mountain peaks were separated. With Sang Poo monitoring from the air, if the opponent wanted to move, he would be discovered at the first moment. In fact, Tang In wanted to move now. Although Oliver was a little careless, after being a bounty hunter for so long, some skills like tracking and tracking had long been ingrained in his bones and had become a habit. In addition to Sang Poo's reminder, he was very patient and careful in his search. Following the direction he had just entered, step by step, he almost covered the entire mountain. It was not that Tang In did not have the opportunity to avoid the defensive line and return to the rear. After all, the mountain was not small. But first, there was Sang Poo monitoring from above. If he was discovered and blocked, the space he had to escape would be extremely narrow. Second, Tang In also had some calculations in his heart. Although being chased was a common occurrence, this did not mean that he would give up the opportunity to fight back. Following a protruding rock, Tang In quietly moved a few feet horizontally. He paused at the edge for a moment, then rushed out quickly and hid behind an ancient tree. Then he went around to the side into a pile of weeds that was half a person's height and crawled forward. No matter what movement it was natural and smooth. The connecting point was also fast and slow, just right. Everything was carried out silently. Not even a single branch was crushed under his feet. And during this process, in addition to observing the terrain and judging the route, Tang In's eyes never left Sang Poo in the sky. If there were ordinary people watching at this time, they would definitely not think that this figure was a human. In comparison, they would think that it was more like a lynx, agile and full of vigilance. Concealment was a skill, and concealment in motion was an art. Just as the old butler had said, Tang In had an almost instinctive talent for concealment. In addition, he had undergone systematic training in the space, and his potential was constantly being developed. It was not an exaggeration to say that in this regard, Tang In was several streets ahead of the assassins in this world. Of course, there were some things that could not be done by hiding. At least, the current Tang In could not do it yet. For example, he could pass through the empty space between the two mountain peaks without leaving a trace, which was about 200 feet long. Through the leaves and branches, Sang Poo, who was floating in the air, did not deliberately stare here. But with Tang In's observation ability, he could naturally see that most of Sang Poo's attention was still here. No matter how fast he was later, he would be discovered. Forget it. Tang In shook his head slightly helplessly. If he was discovered, then so be it. At worst, it would be a little dangerous. And I just hope that Josiah's information is accurate enough. Making up his mind, he took a step forward, and his figure shot out like an arrow from a bow. The distance of several hundred feet was covered in a breath. But at this time, Sang Poo suddenly turned his head, and his blade-like eyes swept past in an instant. He quickly waved his staff and slashed down with a space blade, shouting here, asterisk bang. Asterisk in order to better control the surroundings, Sang Poo was naturally not close to the ground. And because of this distance, Tang In naturally did not have to worry about any attacks. When he crashed into another mountain range without looking back, the space blade chopped down, cutting a deep gully in the ground. Stay you, roar. Sang Poo knew that the attack would not have any effect, so after throwing it out, he instantly flashed over, roaring angrily and opening his hands wide. Chi, chi, chi. The sound of the air being torn apart was dense, and the invisible space blade madly surged forward, sweeping forward. Bang, 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 bang. The banging sounds came from the mountain rocks. The rocks trembled violently, and in an instant, several crisscrossing cracks appeared on the surface of the rocks. As for the banging sounds, they came from the trees. As the space blades swept past, they simply broke apart, swaying and collapsing, causing the ground to tremble incessantly. The attack disappeared as quickly as it came. When Oliver arrived, he could not help but grin when he saw the scene of devastation and emptiness that had been wiped out in an instant. As for the result, he knew when he saw Sang-Poo's expressionless face. Damn, this kid is really slippery. Continue. Sang-Poo did not speak nonsense, and once again soared into the air. Shrugging, Oliver bypassed the messy pile of branches and once again entered the mountain range to search. The following situation was mostly a copy of the previous one. The more Sang-Poo and Oliver searched, the more frightened they became. They had to admit that the other party's attainment in concealment was indeed higher than Eunice's. Other than finding the other party's figure in the open space of the mountain peak, the rest of the time their efforts were useless. After searching for a while, Oliver gave up because every time he searched half of the mountain peak, the other party would quietly break through from the other side. Looking at this situation, the other party seemed to be focused on escaping and had no intention of tangling with him at all. During this time, Sang-Poo's face gradually turned ugly. Taking advantage of the other party's distraction, he had attacked many times, but each time the other party dodged by a hair's breadth. And in the end, he could not continue to chase. It could not be helped. The other party's concealment skills were too high. Even if he joined in, it was not possible to find the other party. Moreover, if he did not watch from above, the other party would have escaped long ago. Phew. Every time his attack missed, Sang-Poo breathed a sigh of relief, barely suppressing the monstrous anger in his heart. He kept telling himself, wait, let him be arrogant for a while. When I can sense the eye of space, I will drag him out and smash him to pieces. One was full of anger, the other was conflicted and depressed. In this state, Sang-Poo and Oliver naturally did not notice one thing, and that was that no matter how Tang escaped, he did not stray too far from the official road. Finally, about 3 hours after leaving the city, Sang-Poo and Oliver once again saw Tang's ordinary face. They did not catch him, but the other party was leisurely lying on a huge rock, his eyes slightly narrowed. Probably tired from running, his right hand was still holding a wide leaf, fanning it from time to time. He looked like a rich man from the countryside, as leisurely as he could be. Oh, you're here, waving the wide leaf, Tang, and appeared to be quite enthusiastic. It must have been hard on you to chase after me all the way. Hey, do you want a fan? Sang-Poo descended from the sky, landing about 10 meters away from Tang Yin. Hearing this, his eyebrows raised, and he exchanged glances with Oliver, who was beside him, a little surprised. But then, he immediately put away his expression and looked around vigilantly. They did not think that the other party could not run anymore, and just sat there waiting for death. Compared to this, they were more convinced that there must be some conspiracy here. Sigh. Your expressions hurt me. Shaking his head, Tang took back the leaf and made an innocent face. Why aren't you running anymore? Well, do you know that the sensing time is almost up? Sang-Poo asked calmly after confirming that there was no ambush around. Yes. Tang nodded casually, spreading out his hands indifferently. And I'm tired from running. It's boring. Then what's interesting? Surrender? Sang-Poo's lips curled up slightly, and he laughed. Hee, don't say surrender, or I'll be really sad. I wanted to say, well then, tell me the truth. Touching his nose, Tang Yin narrowed his long and narrow eyes. After running for so long, it's time for me to watch a show to make up for it. Show? Here? Hee. Sang-Poo's black robe shook, as if he could not help but laugh. He turned his head and asked, do you know what he means? Without waiting for Oliver to answer, he turned his head and said, I'm really a little curious. Do it. His faint voice suddenly turned into a roar, and he raised his wand. Oliver on the side also roared and instantly rushed up, dragging his battle sword with a blue glow. "Ha! Let's go." His voice was still echoing, but Tangen's figure had already nimbly flipped backward, disappearing behind the boulder. Bang, 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 stone chips flew, and the boulder where Tang had been lying on was instantly imprinted with 3 lines. "Go, go, go, go! Oliver rushed up the boulder, waving his sword to release a blue glow, but just as the sword was about to pass over his head, he suddenly stopped, and then his eyes widened, staring blankly below. Below them was a rather long slope, bordered by the official road. Now on the official road, a group of dozens of people were riding horses at a constant speed. They were dressed rather majestically, and most of them were wearing full body armor, with long knight spears in their hands. The others were covered in white robes, holding various types of wands. The only thing the two had in common was that they all had a symbol badge on their bodies. That image was about a man holding a torch. This image could be easily seen in every town, village, and even almost everywhere in Bran, because that was the god of light. "Hey, over here, over here." On the slope, Tang waved his hands, leaving the dust behind. "Dear wise Temple of Light, the murderer who destroyed the saint statue is up there. Let me lead the way." Chapter 379. I'll lead the way for you. These words sounded like a dog's leg, and people could not help but think of him as a traitor. But it was undeniable that he had achieved the effect of attracting attention. The people on the road quickly reined in their horses. First, they looked at Tang In, who was running wildly on the slope, and then looked up at Oliver, who was still waving his sword. Covered in animal skin, a match. Fierce appearance, a match. At this moment, Sang Pu, who was behind them, was slightly surprised by Oliver's strange movements. He stepped on the boulder and looked down. A black robe. Well, now it was complete. Clang, clang, clang. Armors collided, and spears were raised. In an instant, more than a dozen knights jumped off their horses in unison and assumed an offensive posture. Those who looked like magicians also raised their wands, and their mouths seemed to be filled with mosquitoes as they muttered, "F***CK, your mother." They paused to emphasize their words, so that they could form a cadence. At this moment, Sang Pu and Oliver could not help but curse. They all knew that it was only a matter of time before they faced the Temple of Light, but they never thought that they would encounter it in such an environment, and at such a crucial moment. Looking at Tang In, who was running happily below, Sang Pu grabbed the black robe on top of his head until it was wrinkled. Then he patted it heavily twice. Bang, bang. It seemed that there was a nerve in his head that was hurting. "Oh, I've been tricked again." He laughed mysteriously, full of bitterness. Patting Oliver's shoulder, Sang Pu turned inside. "Sai, let's go." Seeing the two people disappear on the mountain, the knights who were blessed with white light immediately rushed up from the side. The magicians also quickly divided into 2 teams. One team ran around the hill, and the other 4, led by an old man in a white robe, quickly rose into the air and flew to the top of the mountain. As for Tang In, naturally no one cared about him now. After running over half of the slope, he drew an arc, avoiding the cavalry, and rushed down the foot of the mountain from the other side. Then he followed the official road and continued to run south without looking back. That's right, this group of people was sent by the Temple of Light to investigate the destruction of the Saint's statue. After receiving Josiah's message this morning, Tang had been thinking about how to make these 2 groups of people face each other. In the end, he didn't expect to bump into Sang Pu and the others in Fire Beacon City. Although there was a mistake in his plan, it was also because of this that Tang In had no other choice. He could only use himself as bait and let these 2 groups of people bump into each other. Fortunately, the intelligence was reliable enough. Now, no matter how dangerous and close the gap was, Tang In had finally succeeded in igniting the fuse. As for what he said earlier about watching a great show, that was naturally a joke. It was not easy to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Both sides were experts, and it was not impossible for both sides to suffer. But even if they were on their last breath, these people still had the ability to drag others down with them. Therefore, Tang In decided to take advantage of this rare opportunity and decisively run as far as he could. Looking at the level of fighting energy of those knights, just now, they should be high in intermediate warriors. Coupled with the well-known effect of the Temple of Light, they should be able to put up a fight. Well, there are also those magicians. Even if we exclude the support, there should still be more than half of the fighting force. All right, there were 5 people who flew up just now. That's at least 5 high-level magicians. TSK, the old guy in the lead, seems to be more powerful. Could he be a great magician? Oh, this lineup really makes one's blood boil, just thinking about it. Oliver, and that space magician who hides his head but shows his tail. Haha, let's see if you all die this time. As he laughed loudly and hurried on his way, Tang In gloated and made sarcastic remarks. There was no doubt that Sang Pu and the others absolutely could not avoid this battle. There was no other way. If it was only Sang Pu alone, he should be able to escape by moving first, then widening the distance and directly teleporting a short distance. But now that there was a big burden like Oliver, they would definitely not be able to get rid of him easily. The reason was very simple. Perhaps Oliver's speed could outrun those knights. But how could he outrun a flying magician? And Sang Pu could not leave him alone. TSK, no matter how you think about it, this is a proper battle. Tang In smacked his lips twice and made a judgment with satisfaction. At this moment, suddenly, boom, 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 a series of roaring explosions came from the mountains in the distance. When it reached Tang In, it was more like the rolling of thunder in the clouds in the sky. His footsteps paused. Tang In could not help but look back. With the continuous mountain peaks blocking his view, naturally, he could not see anything. But from the loud roar, one could easily imagine the fierce battle that was taking place there. Be sure to give it your all, comrades. Tang In pretended to make a gesture unique to the Temple of Light in front of his chest and sighed deeply. The task of maintaining world peace will be handed over to you. Ridicule aside, Tang In was not careless when it came to running. Tang In had been to the city south of Fire Beacon City before when he was being chased. It took him a few hours to get here. Although he was a little tired because he had not rested, Tang In did not stop for long. He bought a fine horse, took a big detour, and finally headed northwest. Although he was very optimistic before, Tang In was actually not very confident in his heart. Oliver was an advanced Earth rank warrior, and the spatial magician was a great magician. With such strength, no matter where they went, they were an existence that could sweep through a region. And Tang In was worried that the people from the Temple of Light would have some misgivings, which delayed his time here. Therefore, although the previous newspapers did their best to exaggerate the terror of Oliver and the spatial magician, in the end, they did not clearly state the level of their strength. In this case, it was unknown whether this rash Temple of Light team could kill Oliver and the others. Tang In did not shy away from taking risks, but he also never had the habit of pinning his hopes on others. Therefore, the first thing he chose to do was to run and try to distance himself as much as possible. Anyway, no matter what, he would not lose anything. If Oliver and the others died, then everyone would be happy. The extra distance he ran would be considered as training. If it did not die, with such a long buffer, it would be enough for him to recover from his injuries and think about his next plan. Evening came quickly, but the Eye of Space's slight heating effect, which always came on time these days, did not respond. Touching his left shoulder, Tang In did not think much and continued to ride his fine horse quickly into the endless night. A battle between masters could end in an instant, or it could go on for a few days and nights without a winner being decided. Therefore, the fact that the sensing effect did not come at this time did not mean anything. It was better to just run and leave the information to Josiah. Chapter 380. The next day at dawn, the night wind had yet to disperse, and the grass was sparkling and translucent. Tang In spent the quietest night in the past 3 or 4 days. Although he had been jolting on horseback and hadn't rested at all, he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. However, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his heart, and he felt especially relaxed. Yes, the eye of space on his left shoulder still hadn't reacted. Tang had been tricked by this for the past few days. He spent half a day hurrying on his journey, but when he reached the city, he didn't have time to rest and had to move again. And this was only on his body. Although he was tired, he could still bear it. The key was the heavy pressure that constantly existed in his heart. That feeling was like a grim reaper with a scythe blowing at the back of his neck, constantly muttering, "Hurry up and die. Hurry up and die. Why aren't you dead yet?" Death was terrifying, but the feeling of waiting for death was even more unbearable. After a while, the outline of a city could be vaguely seen in the morning fog at the end of the official road. Tang didn't detour around the city like before. Instead, he went straight to this unknown city. He had no choice. He was relaxed now, but the fine horse that had been urged to gallop for the whole night couldn't take it anymore. He had to change to a new one. As he gradually approached, the general scale of the city walls came into view. This should be a small city. Tang arrived at the right time. When he reached the city gates just happened to open slowly. After paying the entrance fee of 10 copper coins, Tang became the first passerby in this city today. At such a time, most of the people in this city naturally hadn't woken up yet. The streets were deserted. There weren't any shops open, nor were there any signs of people. The sound of the horse's hooves on the bluestone floor was particularly crisp and clean. Tang rode his horse for a while before he met a woman who had woken up early to buy groceries. He dismounted and inquired about the location of the horse market. Just as he was about to leave, after thanking her, suddenly, a childish and slightly sharp voice broke the silence of the city. "Extra! Extra!" The Gray Bandit surprise attack was successful. The brand's regular army returned in defeat. "Extra! Extra!" When Tang heard this, his body trembled. His expression was indescribable. Then he slowly turned his head and saw a paper boy rushing out from the corner of the street, waving a piece of paper. His face was red as he shouted desperately. The name Gray Coat Army was a taboo to the government, so when it was used, they would usually add the suffix of bandits, rebels, etc. The paper boy clearly didn't understand the complicated meaning behind this. He was shouting so hard because he thought he had caught the selling point, hoping to attract people's attention and sell the newspaper in his hands. Without a doubt, his entry point was not bad, and he successfully attracted everyone's attention. When they passed by, Tang and a few other townsfolk paid for their share. Opening the newspaper, Tang quickly glanced at the headlines on the front page. He touched his nose and was a little stunned for a moment. That newsboy was not a clickbait. What he had shouted before was not exaggerated. The truth was more or less as such. However, there was not much content about such an important event. It only took up a tofu-sized section on the front page of the newspaper. There were no specific details of the battle. There were only a few sentences of introduction. It said that when the brand's regular army approached the Gray Coat Bandits' encampment, they were careless and were ambushed. Then, they returned in defeat. The rest of the words were mostly mocking the Gray Coat Bandits for not following the rules of the battlefield and doing such despicable things. In the end, it comforted the brand's regular army that learned a lesson and regrouped to fight back. Of course, the rest of the content was nonsense. On the battlefield, the winner was king. Moreover, this ambush strategy would be used as long as a general had the opportunity. It had nothing to do with despicable things. He believed that if the regular army used this strategy to succeed, they would definitely be praised for their foresight and flexibility in using tactics and so on. As for regrouping to fight back, it was also a joke. It was not that Tang Yin did not believe that the Brand Empire had the ability to do so. Although the battle at the front line was fierce, it was still possible to gather another army. But no matter what, this defeated army could forget about it. In fact, when he heard that this army only had 35,000 people, Tang Yin already had a premonition. If it was the previous Gray Coat Army, this number was indeed enough. Even if it could not be defeated in one go, it could still weaken the Gray Coat Army's strength and prevent it from affecting the battle at the front line. But now, when Tang Yin came out, the Gray Coat Army's combat personnel were close to 50,000. Old General Old Meng and the others were preparing to build a fifth army. Moreover, because of the hypothetical battle plan, the veterans leading the new recruits, and so on, the actual combat strength of the Gray Coat Army was not low. Although it could not be compared to the three main armies at the front line, it would not have a problem fighting against the second-rate soldiers in the armaments department who were either eliminated or eliminated. Therefore, according to Tang Yin's guess, this regular army that was temporarily put together by the Northern Armaments Department was not only unable to see what the Gray Coat Army's encampment looked like, but it must have been completely defeated and collapsed. Now, most of the surviving soldiers were probably fleeing in the wilderness. Wow, the Gray Coat Army is amazing. They defeated more than 30,000 regular soldiers in one fell swoop. Are you sure this is not a joke? This is going to be interesting. Cries of surprise rang out one after another among the citizens who had woken up early. Even though the news was already in front of their eyes, most people still couldn't believe the news for a while. After coming back to his senses, Tang Yin curled his lips and chuckled, then flipped onto the back of his horse. This news could not be hidden. Of course, if it was in the past, the official newspaper might not have mentioned this matter. But now, everyone knew that the Gray Coat Army had its own means of publicity. If the officials did not say anything now, they would be even more passive when the Gray Coat Army was exposed. However, the officials were only talking about it. Naturally, they wouldn't exaggerate it. That was why such explosive news only occupied such a small page. Of course, these things had little to do with Tang Yin now. The Gray Coat Army's base had been exposed. Although the regular soldiers had been defeated, the path to the base would still be heavily guarded. The reason was very simple. First, it was to monitor the Gray Coat Army's movements. Second, it was to prevent the people in the city from sneaking out and joining the Gray Coat Army. After all, the location of the base had been exposed. Therefore, after thinking about it, Tang Yin realized that he still could not get any help. He could only continue to maintain his running mode. The road to the horse market was still calm. However, when Tang Yin bought a new horse and trotted out of the city, the entire city was in an uproar because of the contents of the newspaper. No matter where he went, Tang Yin's ears could easily capture the opinions and comments about this matter. At this time, he could also see the effect of Josiah's early publicity. Most of the comments of the citizens were favorable to the Gray Coat Army. On one hand, they secretly supported the Gray Coat Army in a low voice. On the other hand, they scolded the Bran aristocrats and were ready to see them make a fool of themselves. TSK, this is the rhythm of going viral. After smacking his lips twice, Tang Yin sighed with emotion. This place was not far from the 100,000 mountains, so he was the first to receive the news. When it gradually spread, the entire north would probably be shaken 3 times. Tang Yin already had a vague premonition that the Gray Coat Army would really become an independent political force and appear in front of the world. This was not an exaggeration. Decades of silent struggle had already given it such a foundation. When the time came, there would definitely be many responses from everywhere. This could be seen from the effect of the farm's publicity. And it had to be said that the current opportunity was too good to be true. The Bran Empire was busy fighting with the northern wilderness tribes and was still at a disadvantage. They could not spare much power to deal with the Gray Coat Army. On the other hand, the Gray Coat Army could take advantage of this opportunity to achieve great things. Once they had consolidated their rear, they would definitely set their sights on a wider area, such as a city. If Twain could see this, it was impossible for Luo Sha to not see it. So, what followed next was bound to be a stormy sea. In the midst of all kinds of lively discussions, Tang Yin exited the city gate and headed northwest again. If someone traced his route on a map, they would find that he was basically walking around the 100,000 mountains, and in the distance, there was a very familiar name of a city. At noon, Tang Yin arrived at another city. He stopped for a while, had lunch, and then prepared some horse fodder before setting off again. The next city was not close, and a conservative estimate was that it would take a day and a half to reach it. Not far from the city, Tang En's body, which was constantly moving up and down with the horse, suddenly trembled, and then he subconsciously looked at his left shoulder. There was a slight heat there. After a while, Tang En shook his head slightly and curled his lips. F***CK. I prayed for you for nothing. You didn't help at all. That's right, the effect of the dimensional I had appeared again. This meant that Oliver and the others had successfully gotten rid of or killed the Temple of Light team. With such a result, Tang En was naturally a little disheartened. Although he had a premonition that Oliver and the others would not die so easily, there was always a little bit of hope. And what was even more depressing was that not only did the Temple of Light team not exterminate the enemy, they could not even delay them. The sensing range of the dimensional eye was limited. Although it was not precise, it could still roughly tell. With the strength of a great magician, the sensing range should be a few hundred kilometers. As long as they could give Tang En some time to rush out of this range, it would undoubtedly be difficult for Sang Pu and the others to find them. After all, without knowing the direction, they would become headless flies. Phew! Shrugging his shoulders and letting out a long breath, Tang En quickly composed himself. The result was already like this, and there was no point in being disheartened. Now, he could only continue to run and silently think about his next plan. Now it's up to you guys. Please, you must do your best. Chapter 381. After all, they had the advantage of nearly a day, so even if Oliver and the others chose to teleport, they would not be able to rush over in a short period of time and threaten Tang En's safety. Moreover, it was not just a matter of distance. Tang En's injuries were now 80 to 90% recovered, so there was no need for him to take the risk of moving around the city like before. His range of activity was now very large. Anytime he changed directions in the wild, it was possible that Oliver and the others' teleportation would become useless. After all, due to the sensing of the Eye of Dimension, there was a half-day error. Therefore, it was naturally more difficult to track him. Although it was only a matter of time before they caught up, Tang En would definitely drag this out as long as possible. All right, let's shift our gaze away from Tang En. After all, although running away sounds exciting, and sometimes even romantic when combined with a romantic encounter, in reality, it's more of a simple running away. As time passed, although the official newspapers tried their best to dilute the news of the brand's regular army being defeated by the Gray Coat Army still spread to the entire north at an extremely fast speed. This was not the credit of Josiah's secret organization. The publicity had been stopped for a while, and Josiah was now rushing to a city day and night like Tang En. He had no time to care about these things. It was an indisputable fact that the circulation of information in this strange world was lagging behind. However, there were some professions that were similar to traveling merchants who acted as messengers, spreading the news along with their goods to various places. But in fact, even the cities around the 100,000 mountains that first received the news were a little late. This battle had already ended 2 days before it was published in the newspapers, and now the finishing work was almost done in the afternoon in Dawn City. The construction of the exterior of the city had been completed, and the defensive equipment had been installed one by one. Several outer defense checkpoints had also been connected. Now, the work was to plan the interior of the city and build the residential areas for the people. The name Dawn City had not been officially added to the city, but the name Rosa came up with had long been spread in the garrison. Now, people were used to this name. It was just a ceremony. In the rear of the garrison, in Rosa's small house. Well, by the way, Rosa's hut is still in the same position and size as before. It wasn't that no one suggested changing to a more spacious environment and a more dignified building. Even the blueprints had been drawn, but in the end it was stopped. Later, the news spread that Rosa wanted to wait until all the people in the city could live in their own houses before building this place. At this moment, a meeting was about to begin. All the higher-ups of the Gray Coat Army were present. In fact, as the scale continued to expand, the various ministers had a lot of work to do. It was rare to see so many people gathered together. All right, Borg, You may begin your report. Old Marshal Omeng waved his hand excitedly. Yes. A young man dressed in military attire stood up from the corner and walked into the central open space. Then, he gave a military salute to everyone present. This person was Borg, whom he had not seen for a long time. If Tangen was here, he would definitely raise his eyebrows in surprise. This was because the current Borg was obviously different from before, not in terms of appearance, but in terms of temperament. He stood tall and upright, his spirit at ease. He had more confidence in something that could be settled down. In the battle 3 days ago, our army defeated the Brand soldiers. We killed more than 20,000 enemy soldiers and captured 6,000. After that, we searched and chased, killing another 1,000 enemy soldiers and capturing 3,000. Our army sacrificed 2,816 soldiers, 1,043 heavily injured, and more than 2,000 lightly injured. Among them, we seized 8 siege chariots and more than 200 large scorpion-tail crossbows. It was clear and organized. Borg's report was very concise, but he could get to the point every time. It made people feel relaxed and comfortable listening to it. The ministers could not help but nod when they heard this. The excitement on their faces gradually intensified. There was not only joy for such a fruitful result, but also admiration for Borg's attitude and words. After a moment, Borg reported the merits of each army's subordinate troops one by one. He saluted again, and the report ended. Clap, clap, clap. First, Rosa applauded. Then, all the ministers clapped their hands, not hiding their affirmation of Borg's report. Ha, well done, Borg. Omeng narrowed his eyes and stroked his beard twice. He laughed and said, You may not know, but Borg not only participated in the tactical formulation in this battle, but he also personally led a division of 3,000 soldiers to launch a key surprise attack and laid the foundation for victory. He can be said to have contributed greatly. Oh, there's such a thing? He's really a genius. We're all old. As expected of one of the 2 stars of the Grey Coat Army. The future of the Grey Coat Army depends on young people like Borg. Borg was taught by the old Marshal single-handedly. We have to thank the old Marshal for his hard work in nurturing him to have such results. Bosco smiled and nodded at Omeng to express his gratitude amidst everyone's praises. Borg, who was in the field, hurriedly took 2 steps forward and bowed deeply. Ha! Minister Bosco is too polite. The key is that Borg's talent is outstanding. Omeng laughed and then stood up to help Borg up. He patted the latter's shoulder and gave a few words of encouragement. It would be a lie to say that he was not happy. Ever since Borg had built up a reputation in the previous negotiations and was finally brought to Omeng's side. Omeng had indeed favored him and taught him with all his heart. Now that he had finally achieved such results, it naturally made him happy and filled his heart with a sense of accomplishment as a teacher. After praising him, Lhasa briefly mentioned the post-war work, comforting the families of the soldiers who died in the battle, rewarding them according to their merits, and so on. The various departments had gradually been perfected, and with the continuous delegation of power, Lhasa now no longer had to constantly worry about big and small things like before. Now, she only needed to check on the final things. Of course, this did not mean that Lhasa was relieved of her responsibilities. There was no doubt that she had to do what she had to do at her level. Therefore, she was still very busy now. The pressure was even greater than before. At the end of the conversation, the meeting was about to end. Lhasa pinched the bridge of her nose and suddenly said, Just now we were talking about the 2 stars of the Grey Coat Army. I don't know how Josiah is now. Has the problem of the organization being destroyed been solved? Sai, their strength is still too weak. Leader, don't worry. Omeng waved his hand and comforted her. With Josiah's ability, he will definitely be able to come up with a solution. Besides, Tang and that kid also went. Ha! This kid not only has outstanding strength, but he also has a lot of ideas. With him, there won't be a problem. Haha, that's true. Lhasa thought about Tang, Un's usual behavior, and couldn't help but chuckle twice. She finally let go of the worry in her heart. Then, a gossipy thought appeared habitually. Hmm. Speaking of which, if the two of them are together, will there be any problems? Haha, I'm really looking forward to it. Josiah. When Borg, who was in the corner, heard this name, the capable and calm expression on his face gradually disappeared and was replaced by a sense of melancholy. What have you become now? A moment later, he regained his confident look and clenched his fists. Just you wait, Joshua. There will be a day when you will admire my strength. At that time, no one will be able to stop me from getting you. After making up his mind, Borg came back to his senses and happened to hear Tang Un's name from Omeng. Suddenly, he felt as uncomfortable as if he had swallowed a fly. He curled his lips in disgust and turned his gaze away. Then he was stunned. From his angle, he could just see the side of his father's face. Although there was a kind smile at the corner of his mouth, he of course understood that it was a cold smile. After chatting for a while, the meeting ended. The ministers walked out of Lass's house in twos and threes, and then hurriedly left after saying goodbye to each other at the door. One had to know that the war brought not only the fruits of victory, but also a sudden increase in work. Father. At a corner, Borg caught up with Bosco's figure. Bosco turned his head in surprise and looked at him. What's the matter? Shouldn't you be returning to the barracks with Marshal Omeng? A little later, Borg looked at the always dignified face and hesitated. In the end, he gritted his teeth and asked, Father, do you know something about Josiah? Bosco was startled, and then he thought of the reason. He frowned and his face darkened. Don't ask about things that you shouldn't know. After all, Borg had been under his father's majesty for a long time. After being reprimanded by his father, his lips quivered and he couldn't speak. Bosco's frown gradually disappeared. He pondered for a while, but in the end, he didn't have the heart to discourage his eldest son who had just made some achievements. Previously, your third uncle sent back a message confirming that the people who destroyed the secret organization were the Dusk Hunter group that caused the chaos in the encampment. Borg was shocked. He didn't have time to be surprised that his third uncle in the secret organization would provide information to his father. He eagerly asked, How is Josiah now? I'm not sure. Bosco shook his head. Later, Blank's army came and the passage was blocked. Naturally, there was no news coming in. What should we do? What should we do? Borg clenched his fists, looking extremely flustered. Of course, he knew the strength of the bounty hunters. Even with Tang in, there was no chance of winning. What are you panicking for? Calm down. Bosco frowned again and shouted in a low voice. Borg's body trembled and he stood still. Then he lowered his head, and there was an unconcealable despondency on his face. Bosco couldn't help but scold him again, but in the end, he held back. He patted Borg on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, Don't think too much. You can't do anything now. Why don't you do your own thing first? Go. Yes. Borg responded subconsciously, then turned around and slowly left. It was obvious that he didn't listen to a single word just now. Bosco stayed in place for a while until Borg's figure disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and murmured, Josiah, Tang in. Oomph. He snorted coldly, turned around and left. Bosco still admired Josiah very much. It would be best if she could become his son's wife. As for Tang in, Bosco had a higher opinion of him. But because of this, the murderous intent in his heart couldn't help but soar when he recalled the conversation on the procurement road. Therefore, in his opinion, he would rather sacrifice Josiah and sincerely hope that the bounty hunters could help him get rid of this big trouble. Chapter 382. A few hundred miles north of Dawn City, in an unknown valley. The location was considered secluded, and it was the perfect hiding place for bandits. In fact, it was indeed so. A building that looked like a mountain stronghold stood here. However, the current situation of the mountain stronghold was not good. Through the wide, open gates of the stronghold, one could see bandits wearing all kinds of leather armor and coarse cloth lying prone on the ground. Some of them had arrows nailed to their hearts, while others had long, bloody wounds on their necks. Judging from the blank and terrified expressions on the corpses' faces, as well as the distribution of the corpses, it was very obvious that the bandits around the stronghold had been killed in an instant without them noticing. Later on, when the bandits started to resist, the stronghold gates were wide open, and the situation was over. After passing through the scene of devastation, they continued to the building behind the stronghold. Corpses were everywhere, but the difference was that most of the bandits here had died with their backs to the stronghold gate. This meant that the gang of bandits had completely collapsed. They had foolishly turned around and fled, exposing their backs to the enemy. Then they were shot dead. This situation extended all the way to the back of the stronghold, where there was a relatively majestic two-story loft. At this moment, if one were to observe carefully, they would shudder. This was because the ground was full of bandits' corpses. In other words, in this battle, the attackers had not suffered any casualties, since they had fallen to the level of bandits, and, on such a small scale, they were naturally not very powerful. They probably relied on their strong bodies to bully ordinary people. However, it was undeniable that if they were able to do such a dangerous job, they had to be vicious and merciless. However, they had not injured a single person. This could only mean that the strength of both sides was not on the same level. The battle was nearing its end. At this moment, other than the sound of weapons clashing coming from the back of the valley, the most earth-shattering screams coming from the two-story loft were the screams. The main hall of the loft was still full of corpses. However, there were a dozen or so cold-faced men in black armor standing in the surroundings. Naturally, the dozen or so daggers hanging down were dripping with blood. Clearly, they were the culprits who had caused the miserable state of this mountain stronghold. In the middle of these people, a muscular middle-aged man in disheveled clothes was lying on a broken wooden plank with a terrified expression. He supported himself with both hands and kept retreating. Following his terrified gaze, one could see a delicate and even somewhat feminine young man slowly walking over. His expression was indifferent, and his eyes were calm. Judging from their physical appearances, the two of them should have been swapped. However, in reality, the middle-aged man was extremely terrified of this seemingly harmless young man. It couldn't be helped. When a bandit leader was lying leisurely on his bed for an afternoon nap, he was suddenly woken up. Then, before he could get angry, he discovered that the stronghold he had painstakingly built was about to be destroyed. Then he turned around in shock and anger, only to find that the one who woke him up was the enemy. After a hurried exchange of blows, the tendons in his leg were broken and he fell to the ground. Anyone would be terrified. Who are you? Who are you? The room was only so big. When the bloodstains on his feet spread all the way to the corner of the room, the middle-aged man, who had nowhere else to go, roared unwillingly. They had been completely wiped out, but they didn't know who the other party was, and they didn't even know the reason. This was undoubtedly depressing. Unfortunately, the young man had no intention of answering his question. He walked in front of him, squatted down, and said indifferently, "I'll ask you a question, and you'll answer it. Do you understand?" Stop. Don't even think about it, Ugh." The middle-aged man replied stubbornly at first, but then he seemed to have seen something. His body suddenly trembled, and his face turned pale. Sensing the other party's gaze, the young man lowered his head and looked at his left chest. There was a brand symbol there. A dagger had pierced through his skull from top to bottom. It looked strange and bloody. He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you know who we are? Gray. Space." The middle-aged man's teeth chattered as he nodded. How could he not know? This was the unique symbol of the Gray Space Team. Most of the bandits in the 100,000 Mountains recognized it. To them, this group of people was like a demon. A few months ago, countless bandit groups had died in their hands, including a large bandit group like the Fierce Wind. Then it's simple. The feminine-looking young man nodded and said, "About 10 days ago, someone leaked the Gray Code Army's base. Well, you know about this, right?" "No." The middle-aged man recovered from his fear and subconsciously denied it. Shaking his head, the young man grabbed the middle-aged man's right arm and curled 4 fingers, leaving only his thumb exposed. He said indifferently, "Why bother? You're going to die anyway. Why don't you cooperate and save yourself some unnecessary pain?" Hissa! An earth-shattering scream suddenly sounded. The middle-aged man was like a fish that had accidentally jumped ashore. His body trembled violently, and his left hand clenched into a fist and subconsciously smashed towards the young man's head. However, this was destined to be a futile struggle. A blade flashed, and the middle-aged man screamed again. His body changed from lying down to lying on the ground, and he gasped for breath like a dying beast. His left palm was nailed to the ground by a dagger. Blood flowed, and he could not lift his hand. This tragic situation was certainly painful, but compared to his right hand, it paled in comparison. His right palm was intact. The only strange thing was his thumb. The curled joint, there was white bone, and there was no trace of flesh. No one could see the process clearly. Even the middle-aged man himself was dazzled. After feeling severe pain, he realized that his thumb had been cut clean. The 10 fingers were connected to the heart. There was no need to say how it felt. The indifferent faces of the 10 people around glanced over. Their eyes flashed, and they actually showed some admiration. This method of extorting a confession was naturally cruel, but in their eyes, they saw a different meaning. Only cutting the flesh without hurting the bones. This method of controlling the dagger was simply too demanding. The feminine young man clapped his hands. His face was still indifferent, as if nothing had happened. He stood up and made a gesture behind him. Bang, bang, bang. Several large boxes were carried over and stacked on the ground. When they were opened, a burst of golden light suddenly bloomed, illuminating the whole room. Even the previous murderous and bloody atmosphere was swept away. Such a shocking effect was perhaps the reason why people still like gold coins, even though they knew that gold notes were convenient. Ding, ding, dang, dang. The young man grabbed a handful of gold coins and scattered them again. He smacked his lips and turned to ask, 100,000 gold coins. TSK, TSK. What kind of bandit business is so profitable? Seeing this, the middle-aged man's face turned ashen. However, he immediately raised his head and laughed loudly. He simply shouted, "Ha, that's right. I did this. If you want to kill me, do it." Ah. Crack. Another miserable cry. The young man lifted his foot and left. The broken thumb was stepped into several pieces. Watch your tone. I don't like it. After a pause, he leaned over and looked into the middle-aged man's eyes. You're still hiding something, right? No. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. The middle-aged man reluctantly retracted his right hand and said painfully, I've said everything that needs to be said. I was the one who discovered the Gray Coat Army's base and passed it to the officials to receive the reward. No. The young man shook his finger flippantly and curled his lips. I believe that you were the one who passed it, but you definitely weren't the ones who discovered it. The middle-aged man opened his mouth, but the young man waved his hand again to stop him. Don't be in a hurry to deny it. Do you know where the main gate of the Gray Coat Army is? East. The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly replied. This answer was quite reliable. In this alternate world, the main gate of most cities was located in the east. Oh, the young man's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. Wait, I remembered wrongly. It's west, right? Heh. The young man patted the middle-aged man's shoulder and laughed softly. He calmly said, It's in the southeast. The terrain of the mountain range was complex. It was unrealistic to build a city in the east, south, west, and north directions in a valley. This was because the city gate was likely to be a mountain peak. Hence, the location of the city was based on local conditions. The main gate of the city of Dawn was in the southeast, which meant that it faced the periphery of the 100,000 mountains. Naturally, there was a reason for such a construction. The main city gate was often the place with the strongest defense. Let me guess. The young man bent his finger and tapped his forehead. He walked 2 steps to the left and right. They allowed you to pass the message. This means that the other party doesn't care about the reward of 100,000 gold coins. Yes, it should be a large bandit group. Since you're willing to be the scapegoat, it means that they have something on you. Let me guess. Oh, they have a descendant hiding outside? As the young man slowly analyzed the situation, the middle-aged man's face turned even paler. In the end, he couldn't help but shout angrily, "Bullsh asterisk T. I did this. If you have the ability, kill me now. F asterisk CK your mother." Smack! A few teeth flew out. The young man swallowed his words with a slap. He waved his hand and said expressionlessly, "My mother is dead. She was killed by your peers." Then he shrugged. "Okay, let's get back to the topic. Yes, such a violent reaction seems to be what I expected. In that case, well, let's play slowly." The young man took out a dagger and bent down again. "Do you know? Boss once told me that as long as the technique is right, even if you stab yourself thousands of times, you won't die. I've always been curious about this. Thank you for giving me the chance to try. Well, let's start with the arm. Even if there's a mistake, it won't be fatal. Devil, devil, you're a devil." No matter how hard the middle-aged man resisted, his right arm was still pulled away. "Wrong. I've only sold my soul to the devil." Ah, after a faint voice, there was an endless stream of screams and wails. The middle-aged man was weak and couldn't resist the pain inflicted on him. Moreover, the pain wouldn't disappear immediately because the other party had no intention of killing him. This was destined to be a long battle. After a while, a slightly plump man slipped in and looked at the scene of the interrogation. He swallowed his saliva and shrank back. Outside the door, there were more than a dozen people. Although they didn't show any fear when they heard the screams coming from inside, their expressions were still a little strange. "Wow!" The fat man jumped up and down and patted his chest. "It's too bloody, too violent. Huff, huff, my little heart is still beating wildly. Harry, look at you. And with your physique, how can your heart be small?" A burly man with a big sword in his hand curled his lips and said disdainfully, "Hey, if you have the ability, go in and see for yourself." Harry defended himself with dissatisfaction. Then he pinched his chin and sighed. "David, have you noticed that Michaud has changed a little? Well, he's a little similar to Boss, but also a little different. I feel a little creeped out when I see him now." "Is that so?" David frowned and thought for a while. Then he grinned and nodded slightly. "It seems to be true. Well, there won't be any problems if it continues like this." I don't think so." Harry's tone was a little uncertain. He scratched his head and said, "Boss is fine, but David, if you have time, you should go and talk to Michaud." Since Tang In wasn't here, the gray space was now divided into 3 parts. David and Michaud each led half of the second phase members, and Harry and Luke led the other half. David and Michaud naturally had the highest status, so it was most appropriate for David to come forward. "Okay." David nodded thoughtfully. When he first met Boss, he also had the same feeling, but it quickly disappeared. Michaud should be the same. "Okay, don't make wild guesses. Leave this to Michaud. Let's go clean up the battlefield and clean up the traces." Chapter 383. The pale white sun hung half-dead in the sky, unable to bring the slightest bit of warmth to the world. On the other hand, the cold wind was still surging everywhere, constantly showing its crazy existence. Winter always came earlier in the north than in other places. Perhaps it could be said that there was only winter here. The only difference was that it was cold and very cold. No matter how much the people in the encampment missed, thought highly of, or hated him, it could not change the fact that Tang In was still running for his life. After sensing with the spatial eye a few times, Tang In could clearly feel that Oliver and the others were getting closer and closer. This was also expected. After all, Tang In had delayed for nearly 4 days. In these 4 days, both sides were in a painful stalemate. No matter how strong they could not change the fact that they were humans. And as long as they were humans, some basic functions were unavoidable. In terms of food, both sides had no problems. After all, no matter how tight the chase was, there was still time to stop and buy bread. But sleep was just wishful thinking. It had to be known that both sides had not slept for the past 4 days. They had already been in this state for 2 or 3 days before they met in Fire Beacon City. So in total, both sides had not really rested for almost a week. Naturally, there were consequences. Tang In did not know what happened to Oliver and the others. He only knew that his eyelids were extremely heavy, and his eyes were incomparably dry and tired. The bumpy ride could no longer stop him from closing one eye and entering a shallow state of rest. This was Tang Yin. He had undergone a lot of extreme training in the system space, so although he looked weak now, he could instantly return to his normal state and fight as long as needed. Of course, this would not last for long, and there was no need to think about reaching his peak state. However, if it were an ordinary person, they would have long since died from mental exhaustion, let alone fighting. But effort always paid off. After crippling 4 or 5 horses, Tang Yin was now very close to his destination. In fact, if Tang Yin had run in a straight line from the beginning, it would have taken him at most a day and a half to reach his destination. But if he had really done that, he would have been caught by the end of the first day. This extra time was used by Tang Yin to constantly run in circles. It could be said that he had run in all directions except for the back. He had forcefully dragged out this much time. Behind Tang Yin, Sang Pu's senses had just ended. "What direction is it this time?" he asked weakly. Oliver sat by the side of the road, blinking and trying to keep his eyelids open. Yes, in the battle 4 days ago, neither Sang Pu nor Oliver had died. In fact, the strength of the team sent out by the Temple of Light was not weak. The strongest of them, the white-robed old man with golden edges, was indeed a great magician. Among the others, there were 4 high-level magicians and 10 mid-level magicians. As for the knights, they were the signature of the Temple of Light, the Holy Light Knights. Unfortunately, there was no knight commander, so there were no earth-rank warriors. The result of that battle was as Tang Yin had expected. Oliver and the others did not manage to escape. In the end, they fought fiercely in the mountains. The battle was unprecedentedly fierce. Among them, the mountains were overturned and the forests were emptied. If such a battle had broken out in the city, it was estimated that half of the city would have been destroyed. Among them, Sang Pu and Oliver had both exploded with great fighting power. Especially Sang Pu, who had single-handedly taken on the great magician and 3 high-level magicians in the air. At this time, it was also obvious why spatial magicians were the most valued. All kinds of complicated and powerful magic were cast at will. Although they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, Sang Pu was suppressing the other side in the battle scene. The final result was also valiant. He had seriously injured the great magician and killed 3 high-level magicians. If such a result were to spread, it would definitely cause a great uproar. Although Oliver had the advantage in strength, he also faced the most attacks. Those who could not participate in the battle in the air all targeted him. For a time, all kinds of dochi attacks and magic bombardments came one after another. The most troublesome were the support priests, who desperately piled all kinds of boosts on the knights. The warriors who were originally at the beginning of the high-level magicians forcibly exploded with the power of the middle of the high-level magicians. As for the mid-level magicians, they had jumped up 2 levels, which was really a headache. Fortunately, when Oliver burst into full power again and turned into a blue giant, his defensive ability increased greatly. Then, in the battle, he found an opportunity to withstand all kinds of attacks and rushed in front of the support priests, directly trampling them to death. After that, the battle became much easier. In the end, when Sang Pu ended the battle and dragged him away, nearly half of the knights and mid-level magicians had been killed. As for the support priests, there were not many left. Of course, to achieve such a result, Sang Pu and Oliver had paid a heavy price. The specific injuries did not need to be said, because it was not enough to make them lose their fighting power. However, although they had 3 to 4 days of rest and recuperation, their recovery was really weak. They could only use about 60 to 70% of their strength. From this result, although Tang Yin's plan did not achieve the ideal result, it was in fact a success. Originally, he did not have a good impression of the 2 sides in the battle. Now, not only did he weaken Sang Pu's strength, but he also cheated the Temple of Light. It was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, double happiness. There, Sang Pu pointed to the northwest and said indifferently. His mental state was normal, and his face was still calm. Magicians relied on their mental strength to make a living. Not sleeping for a week did not affect him much. Of course, on the other hand, his physical strength had become a serious problem. Fortunately, his life as a bounty hunter had made his body strong, so he was able to withstand the continuous bumpy ride of the past few days. Do you think he will change direction this time? I don't know. After a pause, Sang Pu sighed and said, "We can only chase in this direction now." Now, they were no longer in the state of going around a few cities. There were too many directions for the other party to choose. Thus, there was no need to make a judgment. They could only sense the direction and continue to chase in that direction, and then continue to shorten the distance. To be honest, Oliver scratched his head hard to stay awake. He sighed and said, "I really admire that kid now. How the hell did he persevere? It's a pity that he is now an enemy. Otherwise, if the leader knew about this person, he would definitely try to get him to join the Dusk Hunter group." These were Oliver's heartfelt words. They were bounty hunters and often lived in the wild. Sometimes, in order to wait for the arrival of the target magical beast, it was common for them to lie in ambush for days without moving. It was because of this that they could pursue for such a long time. But what about the other party? Was he also in the same profession? In the face of death, even if it is just a struggle, all creatures can burst into a rare state. Yes, let's continue. Although he did not deny it, it was impossible for Sang Pu to praise Tang In. After saying this, Sang Pu approached the horse beside him, grabbed the reins, and stepped on the stirrups. He was about to flip over, but his body swayed and he could not reach the other side. Fortunately, Oliver noticed in time and supported him from below, directly putting him on the horse's back. Judging from this situation, Sang Pu's stamina was indeed about to run out. After doing this, Oliver walked to his horse, but he sighed in his heart. In fact, even if they rested for half a day, it would not be a big problem. After all, although the tracking time was delayed, they still had the advantage and could still catch up. But thinking about what Sang Pu said in Fire Beacon City, he naturally could not bring himself to say this suggestion. If the person you liked was killed, if the murderer lived for a second longer and breathed an extra breath of air, it would be the greatest torture to yourself. They continued to travel. In the evening, when they reached the location of the second detection, they found that it was outside a city. This was a medium-sized city called Riva City. Oliver and the others did not pay much attention to it. After casually eating something, they passed through the city and continued to rush forward. It was not until midnight that Sang Pu finished sensing and suddenly looked behind him. This direction, this distance. That kid had not left the city? Chapter 384. Today, I want to sign a new contract at Chidian. What a busy day, but I can't write less than 5,000 words. Phew. As soon as his left shoulder started to heat up, Tang In, who was lying on the bed, suddenly opened his eyes. He could not see anything in the darkness, but he could feel his own heartbeat. That was enough. He let out a long breath, turned over, and got up. Then he stretched his body. It was the middle of the night. Even if he opened the curtains, the room wouldn't be lit up. Tang In cleaned up the room and removed the alarm device at the door. He opened the wooden door and walked out of the room. He looked around. There was no one in the hallway except for the flickering yellow light on the wall lamp. He walked to the right. Every few meters, he would see a wooden door beside him. At the end of the hallway, there was a yellow wooden staircase. With such an arrangement, there was no doubt that it was a hotel. In the evening, when Tang In arrived at Riva City, he did not choose to leave. Instead, he found a random hotel by the roadside and immediately fell into a deep sleep after activating the warning device. Hotels and taverns in this world were usually the same. However, there were always exceptions, such as this one. When Tang In walked down the creaky stairs, he directly reached the front hall. The hotel was a full-time business, so the door wasn't closed. The owner of the hotel was napping on the counter. He opened his eyes and turned around when he heard the noise coming from the stairs. He was stunned for a moment and waved his hand. "Hi, Mr. Arthur. Why are you out so late?" Businessmen usually had good memories. It had only been a few hours, so the owner remembered Tang In's name. Tang smiled and replied, "Yes, I'm hungry. I'm going out to find something to eat." "Oh, is this your first time in Revis City, Mr. Arthur?" The owner thought for a while and continued, "If you don't go to the tavern now, you can go to the west of the city. There are some food stalls nearby, and the prices aren't too expensive." "Haha, that's great. Thank you, boss." Tang nodded to express his gratitude. "You're welcome." Of course, Tang would not return to the hotel. After leaving the hotel, he went straight to the main road. Revis City wasn't a big city, and it wasn't a bustling area, so it was a little quiet. Apart from the occasional drunkards, there was no one on the streets. However, Tangen's luck was not bad. Not long after, a carriage stopped not far in front of him. Then, like a family, several people got off the carriage, paid the fare, and left. Tang just happened to pick them up. After the coachman heard Tang Un's request, he nodded, indicating that he knew the location. Then, the carriage set off towards the western district again. Just as the hotel owner had said, it was indeed not far away. After about 10 minutes of driving, the carriage stopped by the roadside and arrived at the destination. Half of the street was steaming, and the pots that were roasting or boiling were constantly creating steam. Perhaps it wouldn't look too clean, but the smell of all kinds of food together could always successfully arouse people's appetites. Some were alone, and some were in groups of 3 to 5. Many people who liked to go out at night sat at the tables in front of the stalls. They clinked their glasses and talked loudly about their own things: steam, fragrance, noise, all of these intertwined and formed a lively scene. It was a little like a ukiyo-e painting. After getting off the carriage, Tang looked at the scene in front of him and was a little absent-minded. It felt like he was back in a modern world. He came out of the internet cafe in the middle of the night, sat on the greasy plastic stool of a roadside barbecue stall, waved his hand, and said, "Boss, give me some squid skewers." Then he raised the cup that wasn't very clean and drank the beer inside. Perhaps it was because this familiar scene had stirred up a string that had been sealed for a long time in his heart. Tangen's lips curled up, and he felt a lot more relaxed. At that moment, even a matter of being chased was no longer important. He looked around and randomly found a barbecue stall. The barbecue was naturally not as sumptuous as the ones in the modern world, but Tang didn't care. He randomly chose some pork, beef, and a cup of ale. Then, he found an empty table and sat down. Sipping the ale, Tangen's previous feelings didn't recede. Instead, they became stronger. At that time, he was a third-rate college student. He didn't have to run around for a living, and he didn't have to worry about his family. He just lived a life without passion. What about now? It wasn't wrong to say that he was a butcher with blood on his hands. There was passion, but the dullness was gone. In just over a year, he became a complete stranger to himself. Bang! Your food. His complicated thoughts instantly returned to reality. The barbecue stall owner placed a tray full of meat slices on the table. Shrugging his shoulders, Tang closed his eyes and exhaled lightly. His mind instantly cleared up, and the corners of his mouth curled up as he put a piece of meat into his mouth. The past couldn't be chased, at least not now. The barbecue slices tasted very good. Of course, it could also be because it was his first time tasting the food of a small stall in a different world. After swallowing the oily and shiny slice of meat with satisfaction, Tang grabbed the cup of ale beside him and touched it to his lips. Boom! A faint roar came from the distance, followed by a deafening sound, a bit like thunder in the clouds. The food street suddenly became quiet, and many people looked up at the sky. Of course, it was futile because even if the weather changed, it was impossible to see the clues in the dark sky. Tang immediately shifted his gaze to the east. Of course, he did not think that it was a muffled thunder. If he guessed correctly, someone had made a move there because the sound behind him were very much like the sound of a wall collapsing. These noises didn't last for long, and soon, all traces of them disappeared. The people around didn't care. The noise sounded again, and the scene returned to its original state. But then, the sound of horse hooves gradually became clearer. Obviously, it was coming from this street. The bystanders didn't care. After all, This food street was quite famous in the city. Even the nobles would sometimes try it. Of course, they would only ask their servants to buy it back and wouldn't come to this place that didn't match their status. Tang Yin frowned and looked at the east side of the street again. After the systematic training, his senses were much better than ordinary people. The sound of horse hooves seemed to be coming from the same direction as the roar just now. Moreover, the sound of horse hooves was a bit strange. It was obvious that it wasn't a single person, but the sound didn't seem disorderly. This sound effect might not sound like anything, but it was not easy to do. For example, if a large group of cavalrymen stepped on the same spot, they didn't need to do anything else, and it would naturally give people a sense of oppression. However, if it was a mess, it would make people feel like they were just a bunch of mobs. Furthermore, this effect didn't just stop at the surface. If a large group of cavalry could land their hooves in such a uniform manner, their combat prowess in battle would be extremely shocking. Of course, to do this wasn't just a simple matter of tacit understanding. It required strict training, superb riding skills, and other factors. Therefore, they usually appeared in the army because they could choose one in 1,000 people. But now in the city, could it be? Tang Yin suddenly raised his eyebrows, and then a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Hiss! At the corner of the street, about a dozen cavalrymen turned out in a single file, and then pulled on the reins at the same time. The horses neighed and slowed down as they slowly walked along the street. They were covered in bronze armor and had long spears hanging from them. As expected, Tang Yin drank a mouthful of ale and nodded slightly. The smile at the corner of his mouth widened. I was just thinking of looking for you, but you delivered yourself to me. Oh, so it's the garrison cavalry. A customer at a table not far away said the answer that Tang Yin had guessed earlier. Why are you patrolling so late at night? A person who looked like a merchant asked curiously. You're not from here, right? Hee. Our police station is different from those good-for-nothings in other cities. The customer from before shook his head. His face was filled with pride for his city, but also disdain for other cities. Do you see the guy who's tied up? I'm willing to bet that he's an assassin. Haha, he's blind. He actually dares to provoke our garrison chief. Oh, so this garrison chief is very powerful? Buddy, give me another glass of wine, it's my treat. Obviously, the merchant's curiosity was piqued. Originally, in most people's impression, the garrison chief was someone who sat comfortably in the office and gave out orders. Not excluding those who were powerful, but even so, they wouldn't take the risk of charging into enemy lines. Haha, okay, then I'll tell you. Actually, the reason is very simple, because our garrison chief is called Bose. Tang Yin sighed in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the dozen or so cavalrymen dismounting from their horses and walking towards them. The man in the lead had a majestic body and a black beard. Although rubbing his red nose somewhat damaged his bold and powerful temperament, the eye patch on his left eye made up for it, and even added a bit of fierceness to his aura. This was the Bose who was once famous in the Bran Empire for killing hundreds of assassins in one fell swoop. This was also the Bose who gave up the chance to enjoy life in the capital and came to the northern city where the people were tough. This was also the Bose who climbed to the position of garrison chief, but liked to rush to the front lines during battles. It was not unprecedented, but Tang Yin had been in the other world for quite some time, so he had seen and heard a lot. But no matter if it was the former garrison chief or the current garrison chief, he was the only one in the entire Bran Empire who had such a strange personality. Bose looked like he was just out for a casual night snack. He brought his cavalrymen to a noodle stall. There was no bugnies next to him. There was only a man in black who was chained up onto the table next to him. Yes, he did look like an assassin who didn't know his place. The surrounding stall owners and customers didn't have any strange reactions. They did what they were supposed to do, as if they were used to it. Only a few foreigners listened to the discussions around them and glanced at Bose from time to time. It's really a different world. There's no urban management style at all. Tang Yin shook his head and drank the ale in his cup. He sighed in disappointment. Boss, give me 2 glasses of your strongest wine. Okay. Putting down his arm, Tang and took advantage of this time to observe Bose again. There wasn't any ostentation. He was just sitting at a table with his cavalrymen and eating noodles. His entire face was a little blurry because of the steaming hot soup. This was the second time Tang and saw Bose after leaving Lian City. The first time they met was also in this city, and it wasn't very pleasant. Not only did he mess up the city, he even sent him to the treatment center. Now that he thought about it, there was no doubt that it was because of the situation at that time, but there was also a hidden desire for revenge. During the battle at the Flame Dragon Union's base, Tang In tasted his first crushing defeat in this different world. He was directly sent flying by Bose's overbearing sword aura. At that time, if it wasn't for someone disrupting the situation, he might have lost his life in his opponent's hands. That battle greatly stimulated Tang In. After that, other than desperately training and increasing his blood chi, he didn't dare to be careless in his preparations before the assassination. It could be said that from that moment on, Tang In had matured and started to look like an assassin. After that, he finally succeeded in his revenge and defeated both Bose and Bugnes. Actually, it wasn't impossible to kill them at that time, but Tang In didn't do it in the end. The specific reason was very complicated, and Tang In himself couldn't figure out. He just faintly felt that it would be a pity to kill someone like this who insisted on his principles and dashed forward without a care for his own safety. Of course, there might be other reasons, but Tang In really couldn't figure out. However, there was one thing he could be sure of, and that was that it had nothing to do with justice. Although Bose had always liked to kill assassins who were hated by everyone, it didn't mean that he was a good person. He probably wouldn't admit it himself. The reason was very simple. The last time they fought, it was on the streets, and there were a lot of people around. However, when he released his fighting aura, he was very wild and didn't care about this at all. Thinking about Bose's actions in Lian City, it seemed that he only wanted to kill as many assassins as possible. It was like an obsession, and other things like glory and accidental injury were nothing in his eyes. Your wine. And thank you. With one in each hand, Tang In picked up 2 glasses of bright red wine from the tray. He sniffed lightly, and the pungent smell went straight into his throat. It was indeed a strong wine, suitable for a toast after a successful cooperation. He took a deep breath, walked around the crowd, and walked towards a noodle stall not far away. The business on this street was good, and there were people coming and going. In addition, Bose and the others didn't care about ostentation, so they didn't bother to clear the noodle stall. The customers came and went as they wished, and it didn't change anything just because there were more than 10 burly men in armor. After passing through a few tables of cavalrymen, Tang In directly stopped a few meters in front of Bose and paused for a while until Bose looked up, raised a wine glass in his hand, and said with a slight smile, "Drink, drink." It was a simple greeting, but it was also very suitable for the atmosphere here. Meeting by chance, drinking a glass. After that, would they be strangers or friends? Who cares? Slurp. Bose sucked the noodles hanging by his mouth and looked at Tang In with a surprised expression, but then his eyes focused, and he frowned. He slowly put down the fork in his hand. It was just a few simple movements, but his whole person exuded a bit of a biting, cold aura. As expected of Bose, sighing in his heart, Tang In's expression remained unchanged. He raised his glass again, raised his eyebrows, and revealed an inquisitive look. Bose gradually withdrew his aura and looked at Tang In from head to toe. He suddenly grinned and said, "Ah, good." After saying that, he waved his hand, and the cavalrymen who were somewhat baffled left the table. "Thank you." Tang In chose to sit opposite Bose and put the 2 glasses of wine on the table. He then stretched out his index finger and gently pushed one of the glasses to the middle of the table, not a centimeter more, not a centimeter less, and then withdrew his arm. Bose's eyes moved slightly. He raised his head and looked deeply at Tang In. Then he stretched out his right hand and moved the wine glass to the side of the table in front of him. His arm did not cross the invisible dividing line in the middle. "I seem to smell a familiar smell. Can you give me an answer?" "Of course. But..." Tang In spread his hands and looked at the big bowl of noodles on the table in front of Bose. Sorry, I seem to have come at a bad time. You can finish it. Okay. Bose did not hesitate for a moment and directly answered. He then picked up the fork again, lowered his head, and ate the noodles as if there was no one around. He did not speed up or slow down, just like before. It was as if nothing had happened just now. He only raised his head and let out a slight burp, and now buried his head in eating again. Tangan did not have any special expression. He nodded and smiled at the cavalrymen who were somewhat confused. Then he pushed the bottle of chili powder on the table in front of him to the middle of the table. Bose did not hold back. He took the chili powder and sprinkled it a few times in his bowl. After stirring it, he slurped it again. It was just a bowl of noodles. Naturally, it did not take long. Not to mention, Bose's table manners were a bit unsightly. He was wolfing down the food. Gulp! Bose opened his mouth in satisfaction and breathed a sigh of relief. He put down the big bowl and took the towel provided by the stall from the cavalryman beside him. He first wiped the hot sweat on his forehead, then wiped his lips twice. Finally, he turned the towel over in his palm and gently wiped it. Another bowl? Tangan asked. Bose shook his head. Forget it. It's not too late to eat later. Oh. Tangan nodded and then said calmly, I'm an assassin. Which means assassin. It was a very abrupt sentence, but it answered Oliver's previous question. Decades of experience fighting against assassins was not fake. Therefore, even though Tang Un's disguise skills were exquisite, Oliver was still vigilant. There was no reason for this. Perhaps it was the legendary intuition. Because he knew this, Tang In did not rashly do anything that would cause a misunderstanding. Whether it was the previous wine glass or the chili powder bottle, he only pushed them to the middle. It was the same for Oliver. Although he was alerted, he could not be sure, so he silently followed this rule. Tang In's words were said lightly, but the people around felt that it was a bit strange. Therefore, the cavalrymen who had been secretly watching were not so calm. They instantly pushed the table and stood up, their palms pressed on the sword at their waist, waiting for orders as if they were facing a great enemy. The atmosphere became stagnant in an instant. Chapter 385. The next morning, the morning mist lingered and the twilight had yet to fade. The gates of Riva City were not open, but an uninvited guest had already entered the city on one of the main roads. The white light dissipated, and Sang Pu appeared in a black robe, holding Oliver's shoulder. Luckily, most of the citizens were still asleep, so there was no one on the road. Otherwise, this trick of making a living person appear out of thin air would have attracted a lot of attention. It was obvious that Sang Pu and the others didn't choose to use teleportation to get to Riva City when they realized that the other party was still in the city. The reason was simple. It had been 4 days, and this was the only time Oliver did not leave. This made them suspicious. Was it a trick, or had they finally arrived at their destination? If it was the former, it would be too late even if they teleported here. It was not worth the risk and waste their magic power. If it was the latter, he would have chosen to travel on a horse. First of all, the target wouldn't run away, and second of all, he had to make sure that the target wasn't going anywhere. He had arrived at Riva City at the right time, and the Eye of Space could sense him again. After looking at the road signs and identifying the direction, Sang Pu and Oliver walked towards the city square in the heavy fog. Phew! Oliver took a deep breath of the cool morning air. His tired mind was slightly refreshed, and he slowly exhaled. After repeating this a few times, he finally gave up. Sang Pu, do you think that kid is still in the city? I don't know. Sang Pu was a cautious person, so he did not make any rash judgments. Let's guess. Just think of it as distracting me from my desire to sleep. Yes, I think he is. Oliver patted his head and gave an affirmative answer. He then explained, it's just a feeling. This kid is too cunning. He has never done anything without a purpose. Now, yes, it seems like he purposely lured us here. Oh, what's his purpose this time? Sang Pu asked calmly. Oliver shrugged. Who knows? Maybe he found a helper, or maybe the second wave of people from the Temple of Light is here, and he wants to trick us again. That makes sense. Let's test it out. Sang Pu stopped and placed his palms in front of his chest. Instantly, he made a series of hand signs. It seemed like he was going to sense the location of the dimensional eye. Oliver looked around and scratched his head. Sang-Poo, we haven't reached the city square yet. I know, but I don't have the strength to walk anymore. After saying those words, Zhang Xian closed his eyes, and white light began swirling around his palm. Sam's strength was as near the end as Oliver's mind was exhausted. Although his expression was still calm, if he took another 2 steps, he wasn't sure if he would fall to the ground. A moment later, Sang-Poo opened his eyes and turned his head. His lips curled up slightly. Perhaps you should choose to become an astrology diviner instead of a martial artist. What? That kid is here? Oliver quivered and suddenly reacted. Yes, it's there. It's about 10 li away. Sang-Poo nodded and pointed to the south. Aha! Ollie's spirits were lifted when he heard this. He could not wait to draw his sword from his back. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go kill him now. There's no rush. Sang-Poo shook his head and turned to the south. It seems that for some reason, the other party is determined to stay in this city and fight us to the death. If that's the case, why should we rush to find him? Oh, what do you mean? It's very simple. Let's rest for half a day. Good idea. Oliver thought for a few seconds and nodded decisively. The other party clearly had something to rely on. Perhaps there was a trap waiting for them. Although the two of them did not care much about this, if they could dampen the other party's spirit, why not? And most importantly, they were really tired now. Let's go find a hotel. Oliver scratched his head again to stimulate his cerebral cortex. He tried to keep his eyelids open. I don't even need a bed right now. A floor is enough. No need. Sang-Poo looked to the side and sighed. I'm a person who plans before acting. Oliver turned his head in surprise and followed Sang-Poo's gaze. A hotel sign was faintly discernible in the fog. At first, he was happy, then he was stunned. He grinned. Now I seriously doubt whether you trust my intuition or chose to sense it because you saw the sign. There's no difference, is there? Sang-Poo shrugged. He looked at the window on the second floor of the hotel and gestured with his hand. Oh, what are you doing? Measuring the distance. Okay, let's go. As soon as he finished, the white light bloomed again and instantly cut through the twilight that had yet to completely disperse. Then, it quickly disappeared, leaving only a few words that slowly drifted in the street. This needs to be teleported too? Why not? And we don't have to pay. The sun rose from the east, and the fog gradually dissipated. A beautiful day was about to begin. South of Riva City, there was a large area of abandoned streets, slums, and garbage. Except for a few poor families, no one wanted to live here. Oh, except for homeless people. But now there was no one here. The reason was simple. Last night, the police station mobilized all the people here and temporarily moved them out. The tallest building in this area was a 3-story building. Of course, there was nothing inside. Even the wall on the east side of the 3rd floor was half destroyed. Fortunately, it was not a load-bearing wall. Otherwise, this place would have been reduced to ruins. Pa. A few pebbles were kicked out from the broken wall of the 3rd floor. They hit the ground a few times and finally fell to the ground, making a few soft sounds. Why aren't they here yet? Are you kidding me? Be patient. Maybe they need to wash their faces, eat breakfast, or something. Bullsh asterisk T. It's been so long. Not to mention a space mage, even a crippled dog would be here. In the midst of the argument, a figure appeared at the broken wall. He stretched his back and faced the rising sun. His ordinary face seemed to be dyed with a layer of golden paper, adding a sense of majesty. But after he put down his arms, he helplessly shrugged and turned his head. Okay, didn't you see the effect of the Eye of Space just now? They won't come here for the time being. What can I do? Needless to say, this person was naturally Tang Yin. After reaching a cooperation agreement with Bose last night, the two discussed the details and finally chose this place as the battlefield. After that, the two of them went their separate ways to prepare. Of course, it was mainly Bose who prepared, clearing people, ambushes, and so on. They were busy until dawn. Could it be that you were too obvious before, and those two jackals discovered something? Bose also walked to the broken wall and looked around, rubbing his red nose from time to time. Aren't you talking nonsense? Tang rolled his eyes and was a little speechless. Anyone would have noticed something was wrong, but they would still come. This was the truth. Not to mention that Tang was swaggering in the same place. Even if he told Oliver that there was an ambush here, the other party would still come. It could be said that he was conceited, but a more appropriate way to put it was that he had enough confidence in his own strength. No matter what kind of conspiracy, under the suppression of absolute strength, it was all in vain. After several unsuccessful explanations, Tang simply changed the topic and diverted Bose's attention elsewhere. In fact, if one looked at it from the surface, Bose seemed a little abnormal now. Some habitual, small movements, coupled with repeated questions. He seemed a little nervous, but Tang knew that this was actually excitement. Since last night, when he found out that the enemy he was going to face was the top existence among the bounty hunters, he had been unusually excited. Tell me, what have you done to prepare? I've fought with the other party before. Since we're in the same boat, I can give you some professional advice. Tang turned his head several times and looked around, looking quite interested. Bose's attention was indeed diverted. He curled his lips in disdain. Do you think I'll tell you? Tang smacked his lips. TSK, old bow. You're the one who's not being nice. I'm just being nice. Worry about yourself. Don't forget that we're only responsible for one person, and you have to deal with the other person alone. Yes, this was one of the previous agreements between the two parties. There was no need to mention the strength of Oliver and the spatial mage. Although they were injured and might not be able to erupt at their strongest state, they were definitely not to be trifled with. In addition, the two of them were originally in the same team. If they were allowed to cooperate successfully, then there was almost no need to fight this battle. Therefore, it was necessary to separate the two of them. This was also the primary basis for the possible victory of this battle. Of course, it was not easy to do this, especially when there was a spatial mage in the team. However, Tang had already thought of a countermeasure, so he did not have to worry too much. Don't think I won't know if you don't tell me. Tang shook his head slightly. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he squinted his long and narrow eyes. He reached out and pointed to a dangerous building. There must be a lot of people lying in ambush there. In their hands are, magic arrows. TSK. No wonder you're the chief of the police force. You're so generous even when using contraband. And here, I don't mean to say this, but this disguise is too lousy. Would there be a lot of tiles moving by themselves? Hey, what's that for? I think I saw an acquaintance just now. Let me think, it's Bugnes, right? As Tang pointed out seemingly casually, Bose's expression gradually changed from disdain to surprise, then to shock, and then to stupefaction. As the leader of this plan, of course he knew that the places that were pointed out were all predetermined ambush locations, and there was not a single mistake. Could it be that his subordinates were so useless? There are indeed a lot of ambushes. Tang sighed slightly, as if he did not see Bose's unpredictable expression. But then his face became serious, and he said solemnly, but it's absolutely impossible to kill an Earth-grade warrior with just these. Bose, what do you think? Chapter 386. Against tigers, jackals, and hyenas would sometimes work together. Of course, they would not lower their guard against each other. Even though he guessed that Oliver and the rest were heavily injured, Tang still did not feel that he had the right to challenge them. Therefore, from the moment he learned that the Temple of Light had been defeated, he could only follow his original plan and come to Riva City to seek cooperation with Bose. This was also Tang's final plan. While the station was surrounded, he had no other help other than Riva City. Of course, without mentioning Bose's identity as the head of the police force, it was undoubtedly difficult to seek help from him based on his usual behavior. Fortunately, both parties reached an agreement in the end. This result was not so much due to Tang's hard work, but rather Bose's subjective wish. The reason was simple. If assassins were hated by everyone, then the bounty hunter profession was more or less linked to the devil. In addition, the thieves' union was government-run, so there were restrictions in all aspects. However, the bounty hunters' union was completely privately owned. Not only was its location secretive, but it was also extremely secretive. Without any worries, in order to complete the mission, the bounty hunters would do anything. There were no rules or morals to speak of at all. Therefore, the government's attitude towards bounty hunters was to kill them without hesitation. Moreover, there would be considerable rewards after the event. This was also why Dimpus was so excited when he learned that a dozen bounty hunters had entered Mountain Stream City and mobilized all his men to eliminate them. Bose was a little special. He did not care about the glory rewards, but he was very interested in being able to kill a bounty hunter, and a top-notch one at that. Just as he had said before, after killing moles for decades, he could finally level up and kill jackals to satisfy his craving. Of course, although both parties had reached a cooperative relationship, they naturally would not be so open and honest. It could be said that if there was a chance, Bose would not mind wiping out moles and jackals. As for Tang Yin, his thoughts were similar, but he was more concerned about Oliver and the rest. You'll find out soon enough. In the face of Tang Yin's doubts about the surrounding ambush, Bose did not give a direct response. He only gave a vague answer, seeming to be quite confident. Tang Yin raised this question just to change the topic. Seeing that the other party had no intention of answering, he did not pursue the meaningless question. In fact, Tang Yin was still very confident in Bose. He was not a person who had high standards, but low abilities. Although they were only at the peak of the advanced stage, the outcome of a battle was a combination of various factors. Strength was important, but some unexpected means, a large number of people, and so on could sometimes be the key to determining the outcome of a battle. After a short while, Bose showed a bit of his demeanor of being able to contend with assassins for decades without dying. After listening to Tang Yin's suggestion, Bose walked down the 3-story building with a look of disdain. He then quickly rearranged the method and location of the ambush. Some of his techniques were exactly the same as what Tang Yin had said just now. They were completely copied. Cough, cough. This was a person who was willing to do anything for the sake of victory. Soon, the whole morning passed quickly in a quiet atmosphere. At this time, Tang Yin began to wonder if Oliver and the others had found a hotel to sleep like him. Although Bose did not think that Tang Yin would lie to him about this, he still looked a little impatient. As for the garrison cavalry who were lying in ambush, they were even more miserable. Because they did not know when the other party would come, they were ordered to stay in place and not move. It was fine for a short period of time, but for a long time, their bodies would feel sore and numb like mosquito bites. It was very painful. Time gradually passed by in the hourglass. Soon, noon passed. Damn it, are they coming or not? Bose stood by the broken wall with a big sword on his shoulder and asked impatiently with a frown. 25 times. Tang Yin sat by the wall with his legs dangling in the air. He counted the number of times he was asked and spread his hands helplessly. Have some patience. At this time, they should be having lunch, damn. Bose glared with his right eye and could not help but curse. But at this time, Tang Yin's body suddenly shook and he subconsciously looked at his left shoulder. There was a slight heat there. They're coming? Bose reacted quickly and asked excitedly. 26 times. They should be coming. Tang Yin took a deep breath and climbed up from the ground, looking around from afar. If it was possible that Oliver and the others would have gone to rest in the early morning. But now that he sensed it, it was very likely that they were coming. A sharp whistle was heard. It was Bose who blew the warning whistle. It was used to remind the garrison cavalry who were lying in ambush to hide. Putting down the whistle, Bose licked his lips and grasped his big sword tightly. His majestic body trembled slightly. It's finally coming. I'm really looking forward to it. Tang Yin was silent and did not respond. He narrowed his narrow eyes and looked around like a hawk. By the way, you be careful later. Bose seemed to have suddenly thought of something and turned his head to say casually, Tang Yin was startled. Even his rapidly moving eyeballs were sluggish. He suspected that he had misheard. Oh, don't misunderstand. Waving his hand, Bose curled his lips. I'm just worried that if you die too quickly, we won't have time to kill the other one. Damn it, they're coming. Before Tang and could express his anger, he saw two figures from the corner of his eyes. His body trembled, and he growled in a low voice. In the east, a few miles away, at the end of a deserted street, two people were walking over at a leisurely pace. Their black robes and animal skins were very eye-catching. There was no doubt that they were space magician Sang Pu and Earth stage warrior Oliver. Although half a day's rest did not help with injuries, it could replenish one's spirit and physical strength. Just as Tang had expected, the two woke up on time at noon and had a big meal first. Then, they sensed the location and walked over. Just as Tang saw them, Sang Pu and Oliver also noticed his figure. He, finally not running anymore, Oliver narrowed his eyes and sighed with a chuckle. He should have prepared some surprises for us. Sang Pu's indifferent tone also had a rare hint of emotion. It had to be said that since the beginning of the chase, Tang had been constantly creating surprises for them. He chased them around the city in circles, escaped in front of them, jumped into the pit and bumped into the Temple of Light team, and then extreme pursuit. It could be said that if Sang Pu was not a space magician, they would not have the confidence to continue the chase. Now that they saw Tang standing in front of them, no matter what kind of conspiracy there was, the two of them sighed in relief. Is it that person? Oliver's gaze landed on Bose, and he raised his eyebrows in surprise. Wow, the police station? But he's not that strong. After knowing the identity of the other party from the armor, Bose was a little surprised, but then he returned to normal. As long as he knew that it was an enemy, it was fine. As for the identity, they had already provoked the Temple of Light, so the small city police station was naturally nothing in their eyes. You'll know when you try. Who told me to hate their condescending attitude now? After saying that, Sang Pu raised his magic wand and waved it casually at the three-story building. Gee, I like this way of greeting people. Tang and Bose said at the same time, and then each chose a direction to leap out. Boom, boom, boom. The three-story building, which was already a dangerous building, could not withstand such an attack. After a few more walls were broken by the space blade, it completely collapsed. Dust flew into the air as Tang steadied himself on top of an isolated half of the wall. He was still looking down at Sang Pu and Lu Li. As for Bose, he took advantage of the momentum to hide somewhere. Naughty! Sang Pu's lips moved slightly, and he waved his magic wand again at the broken wall where Tang was. Chi! Bang! A sound that was neither loud nor soft could be heard. It wasn't dull, but it felt a little sharp. A hit? Oliver opened his mouth, his face full of surprise. It was no wonder that he was so surprised. After so many days of chasing, they all knew that the other party's speed and agility were very powerful. Although this space blade was fast, it was still so far away after all, so it should have been able to easily dodge it. But in their line of sight, the other party not only did not dodge before the space blade, but instead waved his dagger to meet it, and then his figure was knocked off the wall by the impact. Sang Pu frowned slightly. No, he's testing the power of the space blade. Well, it seems that he really wants to fight to the death here. Oliver opened his mouth to say something, but then he looked stunned. He pointed to the front and shook his head. Not seems, it's certain. At the end of the street, 1,000 meters away, Tang openly appeared in the middle of the street. Seeing that Sang Pu and Oliver had noticed him, he hooked his finger, his attitude very frivolous. Huh, Sang Pu sneered, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. What an inexplicable sense of confidence. Yes. Oliver also looked unhappy. Who do you think you are? You think we'll go just because you want us to? Even if you want to die, you don't have to be in such a hurry. F*CKU. Before he finished speaking, Oliver suddenly roared, and his figure rolled out wildly, dragging his saber as he went straight ahead. There, Tang, and had already closed his palms, showed a bright smile, and then stuck out his thumb, then turned it upside down. Gestures without borders. Such a strong sense of ridicule and contempt. Even people with a little temper could not stand it, let alone the fiery Oliver. On the side, Sangpu also coldly pursed his lips. His robe fluttered slightly, and his figure rose into the air and floated forward. Tang did not run away. Straightening his previous gesture, he stretched out his index finger, narrowed one eye, and glanced at the rushing Oliver, his lips moving slightly. Ha! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Chapter 387. Even though he did not know the exact meaning of the gesture, the half-closed eyes reminded him of a hunter aiming at his prey, and he was covered in animal skins. Roar! Oliver was furious. His face was ashen, and he gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. But at this moment, whoosh, 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 he glanced around, and his line of sight was filled with black shadows shooting at him. Arrows? Oomph! Oliver curled his lips in disdain. Even if he was not in his most powerful giant form, he wanted to stop him with a few dozen crappy arrows. How naive. That's not right, Bang. With a single step, Oliver's charging figure abruptly came to a halt. Then, he quickly spun around and retreated. Bang, 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 bang. In the continuous and intense collision, Oliver took 3 steps back. His body could not help but sway, but he was forced to stand firm. The arrows left as quickly as they came. If it were not for the dozens of fist-sized holes in the wall of the abandoned house, no one would have believed that there had been a rain of arrows. Oliver squinted his eyes and looked around. He did not take an attack stance, and then he looked down at his palm. There was an arrow and a few drops of blood. It was a strange arrow. Whether it was the arrowhead or the body of the arrow, it looked much thicker than a normal arrow. Rather than an arrow, it was more like a smaller version of a javelin. The arrowhead, in particular, was particularly conspicuous. It was in the shape of a prism, showing off its sharpness. Furthermore, there were long grooves on all 4 sides, making it look like a venomous snake showing its fangs. Oliver had grabbed this arrow from the rain of arrows earlier, and it was also the reason why his body had swayed. Serpentine arrow. The finger-thick arrow was broken. Oliver's eyes twitched, and he spat out a cold, murderous intent. As a bounty hunter, Oliver naturally had seen all kinds of killing weapons. His judgment was not wrong. This was indeed a serpentine arrow. The reason for such a big reaction was that this arrow was not invented for war. In other words, its original purpose was not to kill people. Its actual purpose was to capture large, ferocious fish in the sea. After all, a person's vital point was right there, and a thin arrow was enough to kill. As for the large fish in the sea, they needed this kind of ferocious fish that had a large wound after being hit and could bleed very quickly. Later on, because it was often used to kill people, the production of this thing was banned, and the official production was also listed as contraband. Therefore, it was not commonly seen even in the coastal areas of the Caesar continent. Oliver had only heard about it from his peers by chance, but he did not expect to see it in a city on the mainland, and to use it on himself at that moment. Sangpu slowly descended from the sky. His expression was quite unsightly. He had also been attacked by a demon-piercing arrow. Without a doubt, this was also a prohibited item. Throwing away the broken arrow, Oliver grinned. What a surprise! This is just the beginning. Tang shrugged and said casually from a few hundred meters away. Hee. Although it's a little unexpected. Sangpu raised his head and smirked. But do you think that these things can stop us? Maybe, who knows? Tang spread his hands as if it had nothing to do with him. Then, he hooked his finger at Sangpu again and ran to the end of the street. The opponent they had been looking for so long was right in front of them. How could they let it go so easily? Sangpu and Oliver stepped forward without hesitation, but at that moment, a rain of arrows came unexpectedly from another angle. This time, they were ordinary arrows, so naturally, they could not cause any harm to the two. Alifer roared in anger. Blue fighting aura burst forth, and a few blades of light shattered the arrows in midair. His momentum did not decrease, and he quickly followed the direction where the arrows came from. Get out of here! Boom! In front of this tyrannical sword ray, A few abandoned lofts built side by side in the distance collapsed instantly like they were made of flour. There were no screams, and it was unknown whether it was because they moved too quickly or because they were directly crushed. After solving this small problem, the two once again ran to the end of the street. But after a few steps, whoosh, 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 in a whistling sound, another rain of arrows came from the right. "Are you done?" In a violent roar, Oliver once again waved his sword and shattered the arrows. Then his eyes widened, and he angrily rushed to the right. "Wait!" Frowning slightly, Sang-Pu stopped Oliver, looked at Tang, who was still at the corner of the street, and then looked around. "Is this asking us to make a choice?" Oliver was stunned at first, but then he reacted. Yes, the situation in front of him was obvious. Either continue to pursue Tang, but continue to endure the constant harassment on the way, or split up? Haha, stupid. Sang-Pu's mouth curled into a sarcastic smile. "These little tricks, you want to separate us and defeat us one by one." After a pause, he raised his wand and murderously said, "Oliver, let's clean up this so-called trash first." No one was an idiot, and Sang-Pu and the others were not either. Otherwise, they would not have been in the circle of deceitful bounty hunters until now. Although they did not care about this so-called ambush attack, Sang-Pu and the others certainly would not obediently cooperate with the other party's intentions. After all, this was not the way to play even if one was strong. Wasn't it obvious that they were stupid? But before the two could clear the surrounding small shrimps, a voice came from afar. "Hey, look at this." Tang stood at the corner, tossing a dark dagger in his hand, looking extremely relaxed. "Damn it!" Eunice, Oliver, and Sang-Pu spoke at the same time. One was extremely resentful, the other was somewhat disappointed. Of course, they recognized the dark dagger. It was Eunice's dagger, but now it was in the hands of the other party. Thinking about how Eunice used the netherworld dark mist to melt her body, leaving nothing behind, the existence of this dagger seemed more meaningful. He caught the dagger, drew it across his neck, and made a throat-cutting gesture towards Sang-Pu. The smile on Tangen's face was extremely bright. "Want to fight one-on-one? Bullshit." Sang-Pu was already in a bad state because the relic of his beloved had fallen into the hands of others. Now that this one-on-one had provoked the shame of Fire Beacon City, Sang-Pu could no longer remain calm. He cursed angrily, and his figure floated up, sweeping forward like a gust of wind. "Done." The corners of Tang-Un's mouth curled up when he saw this, and his figure disappeared around the corner in an instant. Just like the outcome of the discussion with Bose before, if Sang-Pu and Oliver did not separate, then this battle could not be fought. It just so happened that Tang-In knew Sang-Pu's weakness, and with Eunice's dagger in his hand, he naturally decided on this strategy. Now it seemed that the effect was unexpectedly good. Seeing Sang-Pu rush forward without a care, Oliver frowned slightly, but in the end, he did not say anything. Although now it was exactly what the opponent wanted. In terms of strength, Sang-Pu, who was at the level of a great magician, was even higher than him, so Oliver was not worried about his safety. Moreover, Sang-Pu now made it clear that he wanted to personally kill the opponent and take back Eunice's relic. Even if he reminded him, it would be of no use. It was better to deal with this side first and then go back to hold the line. After making up his mind, Oliver waved his sword and was ready to find trouble with a group of sneak attackers. But after a few steps, his footsteps suddenly stopped. 100 meters in front of him, two people actually took the initiative to walk out. "Hey, he actually did it?" "Your tone. What's the matter with you? If he can't do it, won't we be in trouble? How is that possible? Of course we have to hold back when cooperating with Mole. If he can't do it, I'll immediately block the way back and help the other party kill him. And no matter what, we're still from the police station. Who would want to kill us for no reason?" As they spoke, the two people stood 50 meters in front of Oliver. One was as strong as a lion, and the other was as thin as a wolf. Needless to say, they were naturally Bose and Bugnes. Cough, cough. After coughing twice, Bose looked up and down at the equally strong Oliver, as if he had found a rare treasure. His eyes shone, and he grinned. "Jackal, welcome to Reva's City. Let me briefly introduce you. We're your guides from now on. We are responsible for taking you to visit the city's prisons, gallows, and other famous attractions." After a pause, the smile on his face became even more malicious. "Well, of course, that's under the condition that you are not dead yet. So in order to do this, please cooperate." Chapter 388. It was the beginning of the afternoon, and the sun was slightly tilted. Although it wasn't warm, the sky was still clear. No matter how you looked at it, Riva City had good weather today. But this situation didn't last long. The citizens all looked up at the sky with a strange expression. Strange. Where did the thunder come from? Boom, 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 the rumbling continued. It did sound like the rumbling of thunder behind the clouds. But right now, there weren't even a few thin clouds in the sky, let alone a bunch of dark clouds. After hearing a few more rumbling sounds, everyone turned their eyes to the south. It seemed like the sound came from that direction. No matter what time and space it was, there would always be curious people who liked to watch. Gradually, the crowd began to gather in the southern city district. But before they could go too far, they were dispersed by the garrison cavalry that was waiting here. At this moment, some of the citizens realized what was going on. Although bows and bugnies hadn't been here for long, their style of doing things was already known by everyone in the city. With this formation, it must be some unlucky assassin who ran into them. Southern City District, Abandoned Street. It should be said that everyone's guess was somewhat reasonable. It was right to be unlucky, and it wasn't wrong to be happy, but the target, bang, a figure flew out and crashed into half a wall. Broken bricks and dust flew everywhere. Cough, cough, puff. Bose opened his mouth and coughed out a mouthful of blood, then climbed up from the ruins in a sorry state. His current appearance could be described as miserable. His battle chi armor only lasted for a few seconds before it was directly shattered. As for the steel chain armor that was specially prepared for this battle, a large part of its chest was also dented. His strength couldn't be surpassed. It had only been a few minutes since the start of the battle, and he had already been sent flying several times. Fortunately, he was experienced in battle and was able to avoid being hit at critical moments. Otherwise, he would have already reported to the God of Light. When he looked up again, the battlefield was filled with battle chi. The majestic figure of Oliver was holding a battle sword and slashing everywhere. He was like a crazy demon general, sweeping everything in his path. Around him, a skinny figure wielding a long spear was wandering around. Although he wasn't directly sent flying like bows, the occasional counterattack didn't have much power, and the situation was precarious. Needless to say, it was naturally Bugni's. He and Bose had similar levels of Do Chi, but in terms of actual combat strength, Bugni's should be a level lower. However, he was good at movement techniques, and his attacks were nimble. He was not like Bose, who always took the hits head-on, so he was able to hold his own. Of course, good times don't last forever. As the saying goes, if you keep defending, you're bound to lose, let alone when there's a difference in strength. Without waiting for Bose to catch his breath and rush over to help, there was a loud bang. The Bugni's blocked the attack with both hands, and then like a kite with its string cut, he first flew up, and then rapidly plummeted, completely smashing apart the half of the wall that Bose had been standing on. Puff! Rolling and landing beside Bose, Bugni spat out a mouthful of blood. His arm, which was tightly gripping the seven-shaped spear, was trembling nonstop. On the other side, Oliver naturally wouldn't let go of this good opportunity to kill them all. He coldly raised his sword and charged over. However, he had only taken a few steps when a sudden rain of arrows came from all around him. His eyes twitched as he glanced over. He took a few steps back to avoid the range of the arrows, and then threw a long sword over. Bang, bang, bang. Dozens of arrows pierced straight into the bluestone floor. The thick bodies of the arrows kept trembling. This time, it was a dragon tail arrow. Taking advantage of this, Bugni spat out another mouthful of blood. He then let out a long sigh of relief, feeling much better. He threw away the deformed spear and wiped his mouth. Damn, Didn't you say you were injured? Cough, cough. Bose stood up with the support of his sword. Hearing this, the corner of his mouth twitched. I'm afraid it's because of the injury that we didn't die. The Bugnes opened his mouth, speechless. Let's go. Bose was the first to turn and retreat. Lead him to the second ambush point. Bose's guess was right. Even if they were injured and could only use 60 to 70% of their fighting strength, the strength of a high-ranking Earth Stage warrior was not something they could resist. It was only because Oliver was distracted by the dragon tail arrows that shot out from time to time, and because they had rich combat experience that they were able to escape death. Bang, bang, bang. Boom, boom, boom. The walls of the alley collapsed, the bluestone floor was lifted up, and the abandoned house was crushed. All kinds of buildings were destroyed, and there was only one result. The area was constantly expanding. It was like a prehistoric giant beast had barged in. Any slight movement would cause a disastrous result. Isn't it a one-on-one fight? Why are you hiding? Provoking my anger? Congratulations, you've succeeded. But are you ready for it? Sang-Pu was flying at a low altitude, expressionless. Every time he raised his hand, a strong vibration spread out, shattering all obstacles. Not far below him, a figure always dodged at the critical moment like a ghost, as if he could see those invisible attacks. After all, this was their second fight. Although Tang could not see those space blades, he could roughly sense their position, speed, distance, and so on. Of course, he could only sense them. He still had to wait for an opportunity to attack. The battle had been going on for more than 10 minutes. Tang's situation was similar to Bose's, being suppressed all the way here. Can I test him? With a calm voice, Tang frantically changed directions several times on the spot, dodging several space blades that he had predicted, and then plunged into the alley. Test? Huh? Bang. Sang-Pu, who was following closely behind, suddenly frowned. The space blades he had casually thrown out just now seemed to have hit something, and then a dazzling white light shot out. Flashing crystal? Just as this thought arose, hiss, hiss, hiss. The sound of a dagger piercing through the air was heard, although it did not reach him. He could feel the sharpness in his vitals. Xiao, without hesitation, Sang-Pu waved his staff, and his figure suddenly flashed and appeared more than 10 meters behind him. But before his eyes could recover from the white light, his ears twitched. Whoosh! The sound of a crossbow arrow piercing through the air came again. Xiao! He teleported again, this time appearing on the wall dozens of meters away. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The sound of a dagger piercing through the air was like a shadow, following the body. Sang-Pu narrowed his eyes, his vision filled with crisscrossing lines of blood. It's my turn now. Oh, let's give it a try. Xiao, Sang-Pu teleported again, this time appearing in the air to the right. Turning his head, he saw that the phantom he had left on the wall was already riddled with holes, and Tang stepped on the wall, his figure flying like lightning. Curling his lips, Sang-Pu waved his staff again. Xiao, Xiao, Xiao. He frantically teleported, his figure appearing and disappearing. But in an instant, countless black-robed figures appeared in the air, on the ground, on the roof. Because of Sang-Pu's personality and appearance, these figures all looked the same and were difficult to identify. And now, in the middle of these seemingly real, yet illusory figures, a black figure was changing directions like a gust of wind, attacking without hesitation. Because of him, there were more and more black-robed phantoms around him. He can even keep up with this? His speed is indeed faster than Eunice's. While waving his staff, Sang-Pu frowned in shock, secretly muttering in his heart. Teleportation was not teleportation. As long as he did not bring anyone, there was basically no preparation time, and he could leave in an instant. Because of this, the distance he could move would not be too far, probably within 100 meters each time. But even so, as long as the number of times he teleported increased, the distance between him and Eunice would increase. But after Sang-Pu had teleported dozens of times, he was shocked to find that the other party was still following behind him. Even if his speed was extraordinary, the direction he teleported in was not fixed. coupled with the surrounding phantoms, to accurately judge in a very short period of time and then follow him like a shadow. This sounded really inconceivable. But Tang Yin had indeed done it. There was no need to mention his speed. That was his capital to make a living. As for judgment, it was actually not that godly. The reason why Tang Yin could see Sang Pu's position in an instant was because of the killing intent skill. If it was an enemy of life and death, no matter how he concealed it, he would eventually cast a wisp of killing intent on the other party. This kind of killing intent was invisible and intangible, but it could indeed be felt. It was only because Tang Yin often studied this skill that he felt it more delicate and sensitive than others. The situation of the battle was reversed in an instant. As mentioned before, now it was Tang Yin's turn to suppress Sang Pu. Of course, this kind of suppression would not last long. No matter how fast one's speed was, it was supported by two legs. Naturally, it was not as convenient and fast as teleportation. From his point of view, what Tang Yin was doing now was more like useless work. But was it really like this? Whoosh, Sang Pu teleported again. Needless to say, there was another sound of breaking air in an instant. Whoosh, let's see how long you can last. Sang Pu raised his staff and teleported again, but in an instant he was startled and subconsciously looked back. He saw a dark dagger piercing through the forehead of the phantom just now, and then piercing through the door of the house behind, disappearing inside. Eunice's dagger? Whoosh, there was no time to think. Sang Pu instantly waved his staff and teleported in. The corners of his mouth slightly raised, and with a chuckle, Tang Yin's long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. His figure was like an arrow leaving the bow as he followed in. When he passed through the rotten wooden door, a bit of blood fell, as if it had cut off something. This was a small room with no decorations or furniture. It was not strange that most of the houses here were like this, but it was a little strange that this house did not even have a window. As soon as he entered, his vision turned dark. Inside the house, Sang Pu had already pulled out the dark dagger from the wall, and his expression was a little dazed. After seeing Tang Yin follow in, he snorted coldly and waved his staff, ready to teleport again. Sang Pu was not a traditional mage and was not afraid of close combat. But this kind of small room still limited his strength, especially now that he was facing an agile opponent, so leaving immediately was the best choice. But bang! With a muffled groan, the space shook, and Sang Pu suddenly appeared on the right side of the wall. His body swayed, and he almost fell to the ground. It was as if his head had hit a steel plate and then bounced back. Damn, after fishing for half a day, the fish finally took the bait. Die! Chapter 389 F*CK. I've been fishing for half a day, and you've finally taken the bait. Die! The enclosed room was a little dim, but the light source at the door was enough to see the other party. Sang Pu seemed to be unsteady and dizzy for some unknown reason. Tang Yin naturally would not miss such a good opportunity. He waved his dagger and aimed for the back of his heart. Sang Pu subconsciously leaned to the side and handed over Eunice's dark dagger. Ding, ding, thud. Two soft sounds, and the dark dagger was sent flying. Tang Yin closed in and waved his dagger without a trace of wind. Sang Pu retreated vigilantly and went straight to the wall, waving his staff to parry. Kacha! Hua bang! The wall shook, and there was a whistling sound like a windmill turning, and then it turned into a sound like a water bottle exploding. The two figures came together and separated. Sang Pu was stuck in a wall behind him, and Tang Yin bent over and flew back to the opposite corner. At this moment, there was a sudden roar mixed with the sound of chains being dragged. As the light dimmed, the rotten wooden door at the entrance suddenly collapsed with a loud bang. Then, a pitch-black iron plate with a metallic luster fell heavily from the mezzanine of the door, completely sealing off the room. At the same time, it brought the room into a completely dark world. Drip! Drip! In a dark space, any sound would be amplified. The sound of water dripping, accompanied by a slight gasp, slowly echoed in the room. How do you feel? My great magician. With a rather playful voice, Tang In slowly stood up with the support of the wall and said in the direction of the water droplets. Huff! Closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, Sang Pu touched the broken wall behind him. It was cold to the touch. Then he lowered his hand and covered his lower abdomen. The sound of water dripping temporarily disappeared. He raised it to his nose, and there was a faint smell of blood. Feng Yuan, sure. This is your plan? It's not very good. Everything in the world had a counterbalance. Since there was a way to travel through space, there was naturally something to seal space. The sealing stone, which was the black iron plate that seemed to have a metallic luster, was also in the middle of the surrounding walls. As the name suggested, it was a stone that could seal space and was extremely rare. Its main purpose was to build a wall in a treasure location or in the tombs of some important people to prevent people who knew spatial techniques from teleporting in. Tang didn't know about this before, but Bose did. After learning that Sang Pu was a space element great spellcaster, he ordered his men to seize it from the black market and build a wall to disguise it. It took a lot of effort. Fortunately, his efforts were not in vain. Sang Pu had successfully fallen into the trap. Actually, Sang Pu was quite lucky. As a space grand magus, he was naturally sensitive to this kind of thing. Normally, he would have sensed it from a few hundred meters away. However, Tang Yin first used himself as bait to suppress Sang Pu, forcing him to constantly move and arrive at this place without any warning. Then, he used Eunice's dagger as bait, and under Sang Pu's excitement, he finally fell into the trap. Anyone can be stubborn. Where's your magic staff? Cut it off too. Although they could not see Tang Yin's expression, everyone could imagine the smile on his face. In exchange, just now, Tang Yin had caught Sang Pu off guard. Before he was sent flying by the air wave formed by the compression of space, although he did not manage to kill his opponent, he still managed to achieve considerable results. This included breaking the magic staff and stabbing Sang Pu in the stomach. While speaking, Sang Pu used some unknown method to stop the blood flow. Then, he sneered, "Do you think that a magus can only rely on a magic staff to cast magic? Moreover, do you think this can trap me? Despicable. Hiss, hee, do you think, who do you think you are?" Bang, bang, bang. Sang Pu's angry roar, Tang Yin's sarcasm, followed by the dull sound of the space blade and the dagger clashing. The battle broke out in an instant. It was Tang Yin who came here after hearing the sound of Sang Pu's voice. It could be said that if it weren't for the slight spatial vibration caused by the swing of the dagger, Sang Pu might have really died under this sneak attack. The narrow space and the pitch-black environment were advantageous to Tang Yin. The dagger he swung did not have any trace of blood, relying solely on the basic dagger technique to attack endlessly. Although the terrain was unfavorable for Sang Pu, his strength was slightly higher than Tang Yin's. In addition, the formless space magic was displayed to the extreme here. Therefore, the two of them were evenly matched for the time being. In this kind of battle where life and death could be decided in the blink of an eye, it was impossible to completely escape unscathed. Both of them fought in the dark, relying on their sensitivity to danger and their ability to respond quickly. In this regard, Tang Yin and Sang Pu, one was a professional assassin, the other was a top bounty hunter. Naturally, they were not weak. Of course, as a magus, Sang Pu was naturally uncomfortable with this kind of close combat, so Tang Yin had the absolute advantage in the beginning. If this advantage had to be expressed in words, it would be that one attack from Tang Yin could exchange for 3 or 4 attacks from Sang Pu. However, these injuries were not fatal, so there was not much point in haggling over it. Block, attack, attack, attack. Soon, relying on these advantages, Tang Yin grasped the rhythm of the battle first. His figure flashed like a ghost. Sometimes it was not necessarily dodging, but purely a subconscious reaction, but the result was that he could often avoid the attack first. The next moment, his ghostly figure boldly pressed forward and instantly closed in. The dagger stabbed toward Sang Pu's heart according to his previous impression. Poof! Hot liquid spilled from his hand. Without rejoicing, he stepped forward, grabbed the black robe with his left hand, elbowed, kneed. A series of close combat skills burst out. Bang, bang, bang. The solid physical touch told Tang In that he had seized the best opportunity this time. Die! With a violent roar, the blood burst out for the first time, but this time it was on his left fist. Of course, if he was hit by this punch, the effect was actually similar to that of a dagger. Bang! The gravel hit his face, and dust was faintly inhaled into his nose. Empty. Of course, such an effect could not appear on the body, so it could only be on the wall. Tang In reacted quickly. His right arm swung out, propelling his body, and the dagger quickly drew a half arc around the surroundings. Hiss! There was no feeling of contact, so this attack also missed. Teleportation? Tang In understood in his heart. To be able to leave the surroundings in such a short time, only teleportation could do that. The sealing stone could prevent others from teleporting out, but it was naturally not a problem in here. Although this room was not big, as long as one was familiar with it, it was not a problem to teleport a few meters. Ha, cough, cough. I'm so stupid, so stupid. Tang In's footsteps moved, but then he stopped in an instant. The position of these voices was erratic, and it was obvious that Sang Pu was constantly teleporting when he was talking. After fighting with you martial artists for so long, cough, cough. I almost forgot that I'm a magician. Not good. Hearing this, Tang Un's heart suddenly moved, and he cursed inwardly. Then he rushed toward the last position of the voice. His dagger struck out but missed. In an instant, he changed his position, struck out, and missed. Just as Tang In was about to strike a third time, suddenly, a buzzing sound rang. Buzz. A buzzing sound that sounded like a swarm of bees was heard. Damn it. Tang In was too familiar with this sound, because it had appeared many times on Sessman. Magic Shield, whether it was the pursuit in Fire Beacon City or the current battle, Sang Pu had never used a magic shield. The reason for this was that spatial magicians were somewhat special. Also, as Sang Pu said, the number of magicians was, after all, a small number compared to a martial artist, so Sang Pu usually faced martial artists. He had wandered on the edge of death for so many years, so naturally, he had formed his own fighting style. It had to be said that in front of him, ordinary martial artists were no different from trampling on noobs. Over time, he did not have the habit of using a shield. More importantly, after a few encounters with Sang Pu, Tang In had actually forgotten about this matter due to the impression he gave off of Sang Pu's valiance. Whoosh! The space suddenly lit up. Ha ha! Not far to the right of Tang In, Sang Pu, who looked extremely miserable under the black magic shield, bent his back and laughed extremely exaggeratedly. Above his head, something like a ball of light floated. Sang Pu was a spatial magician, so he naturally could not release some spells like fireballs, but he had no problem with general spells like illumination. He raised the shield to increase his defense, and prevented Tang In from continuing to attack him at close range. With illumination, the previous dark environment naturally did not exist, which also weakened Tang In's advantage to a certain extent. In an instant, Tang In was in an absolute predicament. Chapter 390. The enclosed space, the bright ball of light, and the arrogant laughter. The sudden change of light and darkness, coupled with the sudden reversal of the battle situation, the original fierce battle scene suddenly paused. Tang Un's expressionless face was slightly conflicted. The black clothes on his body were torn in several places, and the blood inside slowly slid down the front of his clothes. He looked a little embarrassed, but because the injuries were not vital, it did not affect his fighting strength much. In comparison, Sang Pu, who was a few meters away, looked very miserable. Because it was just an estimation, most of the attacks from both sides were aimed at the heart, which had a larger range. Therefore, the originally neat black robe on Sang Pu's body now looked more like holes. Needless to say, a hole naturally meant that he was stabbed by a dagger. However, he could still stand now, which naturally meant that his life was not in danger. Of course, His injuries were not light. In addition to those holes that were bleeding, the reason why he bent over and laughed exaggeratedly was not entirely because he was extremely excited. One must know that Tangen's series of close combat skills just now were all aimed at his waist and abdomen. The trap that I deliberately set up has now become my own grave. Ha! What about you? Don't surrender and beg for mercy later. Ha ha! Oh, you won't beg for mercy. I promise I will slowly kill you. Sang Poo covered his waist and abdomen with one hand. His body trembled violently, and he looked a little out of breath. When he raised his face, there was a ferocious killing intent, but also excitement and fanaticism. His eyes blinked, as if tears were about to come out of his eyes. What are you laughing at? Storm. When Sang Poo spoke, Tang In quickly regained his composure. He curled his lips, and then his figure suddenly disappeared in the air. In an instant, the space vibrated, and there was a faint sound of wind and thunder. Faint red ripples began to appear. To be honest, it was inevitable that there would be carelessness in 100 plans. When one's strength reached their level of battle, the opportunities were always changing and fleeting. It was not realistic to expect a preemptive plan to kill the opponent. The so-called plan could never keep up with the changes. This was the reason why. Fortunately, they still had some advantages before, and now they might have the capital to fight. What Sang Poo said before was not wrong. Such a narrow environment was indeed what Tang Yin wanted, and he had an absolute advantage before. However, now that Sang Poo had a magic shield, he naturally didn't have to worry about his own safety for a short period of time. He could free up his hands to cast spells calmly. Given the size of this place, a medium to large-scale spell would be enough to cover the entire area, making it unavoidable. Therefore, Tang In could only risk his life and use his AoE attack, Storm. To be honest, this space was still too small. Even if Sang Poo did not interfere, the area here was not enough for Storm to explode to its full potential. Under the compression, it was really hard to say where those overflowing blades would cut. However, Tang In had no other choice. Seeing Tang In suddenly disappear, Sang Poo stopped laughing. Then, he straightened his body and stood up with difficulty, looking a little hunchbacked. As a bounty hunter who had been on the edge of life and death for so many years, how could he only use words to attack in such a situation and not make the first move? It was only because his body had been hit too hard earlier that he wanted to buy some time to recover. However, Tang In was too shrewd. As soon as he came back to his senses, he used a big move. Frowning slightly, Sang Poo was very sensitive to spatial fluctuations. Naturally, he would not think that the other party had disappeared into another parallel space. In his senses, Tang In's figure was now blocked by some spatial ripples. Those blood-colored ripples were similar to spatial blades, but also a little different. For some reason, the ripples were not released immediately. Instead, they kept spinning around one point, and then more blade-shaped ripples were generated with such a feeling, Sang Poo naturally couldn't watch it grow. He turned to look at Feng Jianshi at the door and hesitated for a moment. Then, his eyes sharpened, as if he had made up his mind. His hands were raised high, and his thin lips moved quickly. The specific words could not be heard clearly, but there was a different rhythm to them. Seeing that Sang Poo did not choose to attack immediately, Tang In's heart calmed down a little, and then his expression became more serious. Storm had a preparation time. When he first used it against Sylvia, it was cleanly interrupted by the other party. Now, Sang Poo did not choose to interrupt it. Perhaps it was because he was not familiar with this move, or perhaps it was because he had confidence in his own magic. No matter what, the next battle was bound to be a battle of life and death. Generally speaking, it was normal for a warrior to prepare a move faster than a mage. This was because it was undeniable that the power of magic was stronger than that of fighting aura. But when it came to Tang In, it was an exception. The power of the storm was completely dependent on the size of the red whirlwind. The longer it dragged on, the greater the damage area of the whirlwind. Of course, there was a limit to this. After all, There was a limit to human strength. But in a battle of life and death, how could the other party wait for you to fully unleash your power? Flurry of spatial blades. After chanting for about 10 seconds, Sang-Pu finally finished his preparation. His eyes flashed, and he pushed his raised hands forward. Like a gust of wind, his black robe fluttered nonstop. Chi, 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 the originally bright sealed room seemed to be cut off by something. The light dimmed, and the brightness was mottled. Of course, this was not because there was a problem with the illumination spell. Instead, it was because almond-shaped things that looked like eyes had suddenly appeared in the surrounding space. They expanded in an instant. It was as if they had become bloody mouths that had split open. The inside of the mouths was pitch black, and nothing could be seen. But if one took a closer look, they would feel an inexplicable devouring power, which made one's hair stand on end. Open. Following this loud shout, the sealed space suddenly shook, as if it was about to collapse. Then, those huge cracked mouths kept making chi-chi sounds as if they were sucking in air, but also as if something was about to run out from inside. At this moment, a sharp whistling spatial blade rushed out from inside and went straight to Tangen's position. "Come on," Tang, and also roared, and the red whirlwind around him suddenly spun rapidly. The long ripples on the outside were like long whips, spinning and dancing, stirring up the space. Bang, 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 explode, explode, explode. Explosions as fast as beans and as loud as thunder rang out in an instant. Every inch of the narrow space was either squeezed with large and small spatial blades or stuffed with blood-red sword rays. Contending, entangling, neutralizing, every moment without end. At this time, death might happen in the next second, because as long as there was a moment of carelessness, or rather, the offensive and defensive forms would be broken. The chaotic spatial blades and red whirlwinds on the outside would instantly shred the opponent into nothingness. Similarly, at this time, death was not easy either. Tang had a tight red whirlwind around him, and he used offense as a substitute for defense. As for Sang-Pu, not to mention those chaotic spatial blades, his magic shield, which was at the level of a great magician, was enough to defend for a moment. It was very contradictory, but it was a true portrayal of the current situation. Phew, looks like he's really injured. Controlling the whirlwind, Tang breathed a sigh of relief. The existence of a great magician was enough to scare people wherever he went, not to mention a spatial magician. Just as Oliver had thought before, Sang-Pu's strength was indeed superior to his. Even in the Dusk Hunter group, although they had never fought, the group leader, Yema, whose strength had reached the peak of the Earth stage, did not dare to say that he could defeat Sang-Pu. This was the strength suppression of a magician of the same level against a warrior of the same level. Tang relied on his blood chi to make a living. After killing Eunice, his blood chi leveled up, and his strength increased correspondingly. However, if one were to calculate, he was still slightly inferior to Oliver, and naturally was not Sang-Pu's opponent. Fortunately, from the current power of the magic, Sang-Pu was indeed injured, and the injury was not light. The chaotic spatial blades and the red whirlwind were only evenly matched and did not crush the opponent as expected. From this point of view, it did not affect the probability of survival for both sides. At this moment, open, 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 die. Compared to the somewhat satisfied Tang Yin, Sang-Pu was very dissatisfied with the current situation. His arms danced wildly, and he roared again and again. Some spatial cracks suddenly opened around him, and some were hit by the red whirlwind and immediately closed. Some, under the cover of the previous cracks, spat out spatial blades again. Huff, huff. Ha. Do you want to know how I will slowly kill you later? I will use the spatial blades to cut you off piece by piece. Seeing that the situation of the battle would not change in a short time, Sang-Pu's eyes flashed, and he began to spit out crazy words again. This could be regarded as hatred, but it could also be regarded as some tricks. It must be known that in such a battle where no mistakes could be made, a psychological fluctuation could decide life and death. It sounded a bit despicable, but the truth was that the winner takes all. However, it was clear that Sang-Pu had found the wrong opponent. Eunice mentioned you before she died. Tang Un's mouth twitched slightly, and a few words made the crazy clamor come to an abrupt end. Do you know what she said? Sang-Pu was silent. Regardless of whether he believed it or not, he undoubtedly wanted to know the answer to this question. She said, and right, what did she say? You. Sang-Pu was anxious. Although he could not see Tang Un, he could imagine that he must have a joking expression on his face. And it was the expression when he was teasing a dog with a bone. Oh, I remember now. And she said that you are a good person, a very good person, but unfortunately, you are not suitable for her. Uh-huh. And? Crackle, crackle. Walla, walla. Just when Tang and was happily giving out the good person card, the sound of bricks breaking suddenly came. When he turned his head, the surrounding walls used for camouflage fell down one after another. However, in an instant, the pitch-black stone inside was revealed. When he turned his head again, the stone at the door was covered with crisscrossing scars, slightly shaking, and in imminent danger. Damn it! Tang Un's mouth twitched, and he could not help but wail in his heart. Then his long and narrow eyes instantly narrowed. Fight! On the dagger, a bloody glow burst out, and without hesitation, he stabbed into a spot inside the whirlwind. Break, break, break! Chapter 391. The citizens were used to it. When they found out that an area in the South District was being monitored by the garrison cavalry, they weren't surprised at all. They were really used to it. Ever since Bose and the Bugnes came to Riva City and became the first and second in command of the garrison, this kind of thing was very common. It was just that this time the scale was bigger, the noise was more shocking, and more assassins were caught. That was it. But soon they realized that this time it was really big. Boom! A wave of air rushed into the sky. The people in Riva City felt the ground shake. They subconsciously turned to the south. Those who were closer and reacted faster could see some blurry black shadows like wooden planks and stones rushing into the sky. To be able to create such a commotion at such a distance, it was enough to make anyone speechless. What is Bose doing now? Does he want to destroy Riva City? This situation? Could it be that Earth-grade warriors are fighting in the city? These words are filled with anger and fear. Most of them came from the nobles in the East District. Normally, if a military organization like the garrison wanted to do something big, they would have to report it to the higher-ups first. Then, some important people would either suppress this action or spread the news to avoid something that involved them. But who was Bose? If he reported it, he would be giving him face. If he didn't report it, it would be reasonable. This action involved the bounty hunter who destroyed the statue in Mountain Stream City. Plus, Bose himself also did some shady business. To keep his secret, naturally, he didn't report it in a righteous manner. What? Fired? Stop joking. With Bo's achievements, as long as he didn't make the same mistake as Dempus in Mountain Stream City, he wouldn't receive this kind of treatment anywhere. Of course, it was also possible to fire him. After all, the mayor's meeting room had the power to do so. But if you fired him, Bose might pack up and move to the capital of Bran. Don't forget, he had this kind of appointment in his hands, and it was the treatment of the vice chief of the capital's dragon riders. More importantly, which noble family didn't have a dark history under their butts? The only difference was whether they were exposed or not. However, the police station knew the most about this. No one dared to guarantee that Bose would not directly hand these over to the Empire's court after entering the capital. That's right, everyone knew that this was an act of mutual destruction. If he reported it, Bose wouldn't be able to survive anywhere. But don't forget, this Bose really looks like a lunatic. And no matter what a lunatic does, it's not strange. Compared to the conflicted emotions of the nobles, as well as the actions of some who directly packed their things and left the city, the reaction of the commoners was the most direct. They wanted to watch the show and follow the crowd. No one knew who took the lead, but in the end, the crowd from all directions surged toward the South City District. Of course, Just like before, they were stopped by the garrison cavalry that had been waiting for them. Bose had considered this possibility before the incident, so other than the necessary manpower, most of the cavalry was left outside. However, while these cavalrymen could fend off the curious citizens, they could not stop those who had the strength and wanted to enter in the corner of the South City District. Because it was close to the city walls, it was remote, so basically no one came to watch the show. Correspondingly, there were not many guards here, only a mere 5 cavalrymen guarding the alley that led inside. Just as these confused cavalrymen were trying to guess what was going on inside, Lindley said, "What's going on?" Suddenly, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. "What's that?" "Quick, warn them, warn them." "Cut it down." "Ouch." Asterisk bang, bang, bang. Asterisk the incident happened so suddenly that a few cavalrymen saw a few ribbons of water that looked like small streams in the mountains suddenly extend from the alley and wrap around their ankles. A strong force came from there and flipped them over. Then they were quickly dragged outside. Their bodies lost their center of gravity, so they could not warn them in time. Some of them reacted quickly and slashed with their swords, but the sharp blades went straight through the ribbons of water, and there was no effect. Before they could react, they were already dragged out of the alley. Then, they saw about 10 people waiting there. The most conspicuous one was the white-robed lady in the middle, because the source of the ribbons of water was the magic wand in her hand. A mage! Just as this shocking thought popped up in their minds, the cavalryman's vision was filled with huge bricks. Asterisk bang, bang, bang. Asterisk one for each of them. It was easy. The people who were waiting here knocked the cavalryman unconscious without any hesitation. The white-robed lady waved her magic wand, and the ribbons of water disappeared. Then she ordered these people, "Okay, I'll go in later. You guys are responsible for watching these people. If any of them wakes up, knock them unconscious again. Don't worry, I'm a professional." Whoosh, whoosh. A young man waved the half-brick in his hand twice and said rather casually. Then he scratched the side of his face, a little hesitant. "Leader, the noise just now? I'm afraid it's very dangerous inside." He paused, probably knowing that he could not persuade her, and spread out his hands. "Leader, please be careful. Don't worry, I'm a professional too. Hee hee." The white-robed lady waved her magic wand in her hand, chuckling and nodding, then turned and ran into the alley. Soon after, she disappeared around the corner. "Sigh." The young man sighed silently, and his face was a little lonely. But then, he threw away the brick, rubbed his face, and returned to his normal expression. He turned and pointed at the cavalryman on the ground. "Quick, pick a few people to change into these clothes. Go and find me a few more bricks. The ones just now are not sturdy, and they broke, and I almost fainted." South City District, the epicenter of the explosion. If the people outside could feel such a strong movement, it was needless to say that the situation here was even more so. Looking around, within a radius of a few hundred meters, there was an open space. The abandoned houses and other buildings that were originally erected were all turned into ruins. The crisscrossing streets were also indistinguishable, and everywhere was a mess. Earthquakes, tornadoes, and other natural disasters were just like this. At this time, some time had passed since the explosion, but there were still no signs of any survivors. It was only temporary, because there was a figure lying on a wooden plank in one of the ruins. However, looking at the badly mutilated body and the legs that were cut off at the knees, no matter how one looked at it, it didn't look like it could breathe, cough, cough. Suddenly, the body that was almost inhuman suddenly moved, and then it trembled violently and let out 2 rather hoarse coughs. Because of this, the blood flowing from his wounds sped up. After a while, it seemed that he was slightly awake. He was not in a hurry to turn over, but waved his hand in front of his eyes twice, then pushed the hair in front of his forehead aside, waved it twice again, and then stopped in front of his eyes. After a while, he shook his head slightly and used both hands to support himself on the wooden plank, slowly turning it over. It was just a simple action, but he did it as if there were countless cameras turning the body over inch by inch. Disheveled hair, pale face. Vaguely, it was the appearance of a young man. Chapter 392. Being a mage was a somewhat monstrous profession. As long as one had enough strength, it was normal for one to live for 300 to 500 years. At the same time, this was also a group of people who lived an elegant life. Well, the premise was that they did not study dark magic like the dead. It could be said that they did not need any maintenance. For the first few decades, they would have the appearance of a lively young man. In the middle 100 years, they would have the appearance of a mature man. In the later years, they would appear as a knowledgeable old man with a white beard. Strength, status, appearance, long lifespan. Everything was there. A winner in life was more or less like this. But there was really nothing to be envious about, because magic talent was really a gift from the heavens. Even those families with mage bloodlines in their ancestors only had a slightly higher probability than ordinary people. Of course, no matter how elegant and noble a mage was, when his hair was disheveled, his body was badly mutilated, and his 2 calves were amputated, he would only be left in a sorry state and could not bear to look straight at him. That's right, this dying young man on the wooden planks of the ruins was Sang-Pu. Actually, other than being able to cut off space, the space sealing stone was also very hard. Of course, this hardness was relative depending on what kind of attack it encountered. Without a doubt, with Tang In and Sang-Pu's strength, breaking it was not a problem at all. This was also the reason why Tang In attacked first, and why Sang-Pu wanted to trap him, which was really naive. Later, when the flurry spatial blades collided with the red whirlwind, the space sealing stone could not hold on any longer. And if they were in a wider area, Sang-Pu would have an overwhelming advantage like before. Tang In naturally could not let this happen, so before the room shattered, he decisively detonated the red whirlwind. Keen insight, decisive life, and death. To be honest, this was really a move that only a lunatic could do. In such a narrow space, every inch was packed with spatial blades and blood-colored blades. No matter which one detonated, the triggered effect would be of a chain nature, and the people inside would have no way to dodge at all, because no matter how they dodged or moved, they would be met with a concentrated attack. For someone like Sang-Pu, who was half-crippled and close to death, it was already the result of the god of light's blessing. Dead, Sang-Pu did not turn his head to look around. Of course, there was not much difference whether he looked or not. This was because there was a deep wound on his forehead that connected his eyebrows together, and at the same time his eyes were injured. Although he did not completely lose his vision after being soaked in blood, he could only see blurry scenes. This was already considered lucky, because if the wound had been a little deeper, his entire skull would have been torn off. Sang-Pu closed his eyes and sensed the spatial fluctuations. Then, he slowly exhaled a foul breath. Phew! He should be dead. Without moving, Sang-Pu sat up cross-legged with difficulty. He vaguely looked at his broken legs. His expression was neither happy nor sad, but there was an indescribable complexity. This position was a meditation, and he wasn't in that state of mind. After the initial shock, his heart was filled with the joy of avenging his great enmity, as well as the joy of surviving a calamity. Yes, there was also a faint sense of accomplishment. In fact, Sang-Pu had the opportunity to break out of the house after he put up the magic shield, but he did not do so in the end. Instead, he chose to cast magic to fight Tang In to the death. The reason for this was very complicated, but the decisive factor was still his obsession with fighting one-on-one. He didn't have the courage to confess to Eunice before. Was he going to avoid the opportunity for revenge now? Never. He wanted to prove himself to the dead Eunice, and now, he succeeded. I've done what I should do. You should be able to rest in peace. And I'm relieved. Sang-Pu raised his head. In his blurred vision, there was a blue sky. His low murmur gradually drifted away. After a moment, he raised his hand to wipe away the blood that had once again entered his eye socket and casually flung it away. Sang-Pu didn't care too much about his injuries. He knew that he wouldn't die, and that was enough. Now, he just needed to wait for Oliver to finish off the other side and come back to pick him up. With a cry of surprise, Sang-Pu opened his eyes again. Vaguely, on the ruins dozens of meters in front of him, A pitch-black object standing upright attracted his attention. Although he couldn't see it clearly, he already knew the answer in his heart. His lips curled up slightly. So you came out too. It was Eunice's dagger. In the previous battle, it had been sent flying by Tang and nailed to the wall. Who would have thought that it would fall outside with the explosion? Without hesitation, Sang Pu leaned sideways and lay on the wooden board again. Then, using the strength of his hands, he slowly crawled over there. Sang Pu was now seriously injured, but it didn't mean that he didn't have the ability to attack. If there were a few ignorant fellows who came up to take advantage of the situation, they would definitely be cut in half by the spatial blade. Of course, advanced magic, such as the flight spell, couldn't be used. So, his movements were naturally slow. Coupled with the injuries on his body, after crawling for about 10 meters, Sang Pu left a long trail of blood behind him. He paused for a moment and stretched out his arm again. Suddenly, his arm stopped in the air. Sang Pu suddenly raised his head and looked at the ruins in front of him. Rustle, rustle. It was a very soft sound, like a mouse chewing something, but also like an underground creature moving stealthily under the ground. In just a few seconds, the sound became clearer. Bang! About 100 meters in front of Sang Pu, the ruins where the previous battle had taken place suddenly exploded, and the pile of broken wood and earth was pushed to one side. Following which, a palm stretched out from inside and laid on the broken rock at the side. Following that, another arm that was holding a dented dagger stretched out. Bending the arm and exerting force, a black-gray figure with traces of blood emerged from inside. After looking at it for a while, he raised his head and laughed. Wah! I Huhan San am back. Damn! Chi! Bang! With a sharp whistle, the broken stone above the ruins was instantly smashed into pieces. And right next to it, the figure that had just come out immediately disappeared, as if it had fallen down again. Bullshit! Sang Pu muttered softly, his right hand still in a chopping posture, his face ashen. There were only 2 people fighting here, and, coupled with the familiar and harsh tone, Sang Pu instantly recognized that it was Tang Yin. Just now, he wanted to take advantage of the opportunity when the opponent's back was facing him to launch a space blade and kill him directly. But his vision was blurred, and in the end, he missed the perfect opportunity. F***CK. The figure that fell to the bottom of the pit again turned over as if it had been electrocuted, grimacing for a while, and then couldn't help but curse. That's right, it was Tang Yin. After detonating the red whirlwind, his body instantly burst out with a bloody glow, and he crashed into the ground. Without a magic shield, and without the ability to teleport, his only choice was to escape underground. It was a good strategy. Of course, no matter how fast he was not as fast as an attack that arrived in an instant. So, he was also seriously injured. Especially on his back, a diagonal wound stretched from his right shoulder to his left rib, and the white bone was deep and flesh was exposed. Tang had admitted defeat for this attack. It couldn't be helped. It was like rushing out to have romantic fun on a rainy day, and it was normal to be dripped with rain. It was already good enough that he didn't get hurt. However, although he admitted defeat, it didn't mean that Tang Yin wasn't depressed. It wasn't a matter of not being satisfied, but the wound on his back was actually caused by his own bloody blade. That wasn't all. When he endured the pain all over his body and the danger of fainting at any time, after painstakingly digging the pit and rushing out in one fell swoop, he was actually sent to the bottom by an attack. Huff! Huff! After about 10 seconds of panting, the dark clouds in front of him finally dispersed, and Tang Yin immediately raised his middle finger to the blue sky outside the pit. To be honest, after experiencing this kind of transmigration, Tang Yin began to believe in things like gods, and he didn't dare to offend them easily. But this definitely didn't include the gods in the other world. How should he put it? He didn't know if it was because he didn't have a local account. In the other world, it was as if no gods were willing to protect him at all. His luck was really as bad as it could be. After complaining for a while, Tang Yin didn't dare to delay. He bit the dagger in his mouth and climbed up. Although he didn't see the attacker, just now. He couldn't be more familiar with that attack. It was clearly a space blade, which meant that Sang-Pu didn't die. If he didn't get out quickly, he would be trapped here, and it would really be like catching a turtle in a jar. Fortunately, this pit had been dug out, unlike before when he almost suffocated and couldn't get out. 10 seconds later, Tang In poked his head out from the edge of the pit. At a glance, he saw the young man sitting cross-legged 100 meters away. Tang In hadn't seen Sang-Pu's real face, but according to the current situation, even if he was stupid, he could guess that this young man was Sang-Pu. After roughly sizing him up, his eyes focused on the bare knees. Letting out a long sigh, Tang In couldn't help but slightly raise the corner of his mouth. No wonder. Hee, good result. With a push on the edge of the pit, Tang In jumped up to the ruins, staggered 2 steps, and then stabilized his body. Chi, chi, chi. Sang-Pu raised his eyebrows and waved his hands. Invisible space blades instantly attacked. Bang, bang, bang. The pile of ruins was hit again. Debris and debris flew everywhere. Tang In had already expected this attack, so without hesitation, he rolled a few times and hid under the half of the wall beside the pile of ruins. Here, Tang In took a few deep breaths to suppress the pain all over his body. Then he frowned in surprise. Frowning and thinking for a while, he poked his head out and shouted, "Are you blind?" Well, he really wasn't gloating, nor was he cursing. Well, at least not all of it. There was also Tang In's doubts about how many of the attacks missed when he was dodging just now. The attack stopped, and for a moment, Sang-Pu's voice came, "Are you hurt?" He, not as heavy as you, broken leg, great magician. Oh, right, you can also fly. You don't need legs at all. Is that so? But it's enough to kill you. Die. Boom! With a loud noise, half of the wall was instantly penetrated by a powerful airflow and crushed into pieces. Not being able to see didn't mean that he couldn't identify the location by hearing. For a bounty hunter with rich combat experience, this was really a trivial trick. Hee, you're really treacherous. Well, don't tell me that you're blind, also tricking me. You want me to lower my vigilance and get close, then suddenly attack. Similarly, Tang In also knew this little trick, so naturally he wouldn't fall for it easily. Sang-Pu didn't have any depressed expression, but he didn't continue to attack, and said lightly, "Why don't you try and find out?" Okay, you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.